Tonight, we enter a darker version of the Harry Potter story. Not a world where Voldemort is stronger or Dumbledore is weaker, but one where the quiet center of the Golden Trio shifts. Where the brightest mind at Hogwarts steps out of Harry's shadow and turns to face him as an enemy. Imagine Hogwarts by candlelight, the castle alive with whispers and moving staircases, but the bedrock assumption of loyalty has cracked. The girl who knew every charm before it was taught. The friend who always had the plan. In this telling, she is no longer Harry's shield. She is his potential executioner. This is important, because the question is not simply, what if Hermione Granger betrayed Harry Potter? The question is, what if the one person who understood his magic, his habits, his fears, and his weaknesses better than anyone else decided that Harry himself was the real danger to the wizarding world and acted with the same relentless logic she once used to save him? We remember the canon images as if they are carved into stone. Hermione dragging Ron and Harry out of the devil's snare, shouting the answer while the vines tightened. Hermione stirring the polyjuice potion in a stolen bathroom, steam rising as she calmly breaks a dozen school rules for her friends. Hermione standing bloodied in the Department of Mysteries, hexes on her lips even as she falls. Now freeze each of those moments in your mind. Hold them still, like a photograph laid on a grave. What happens if every one of those scenes is reread, not as loyalty fulfilled, but as a future traitor gathering data, learning exactly how Harry survives, exactly how he breaks the rules of fate and prophecy? The grave was empty in this version of the story, but not in Godric's Hollow. It is the grave of certainty, the quiet belief that Hermione's loyalty is unshakable. Not Dumbledore, who had trusted her prefect's badge and her rigid sense of justice. Not Hagrid, who had watched her defend Harry again and again. Not Sirius, who had seen her stand in front of a killer to protect his godson. None of them ever truly considered that the same ferocious conscience could turn. That the same devotion to rules and order could be sharpened against Harry himself. Tonight, we follow a slow burn descent, not a cheap, sudden heel turn. Step by step, argument by argument, we will trace how a girl who once wept over house elf rights, who rewrote her parents' memories for what she believed was a greater good, could come to believe that handing Harry's secrets to his enemies is the last terrible act of justice left to her. How does a mind like hers weigh prophecy against collateral damage? How does she look at a boy who attracts catastrophe and decide that ending his story might save countless lives? Without Hermione, there is no Golden Trio as we know it. Remove her from Harry's side, or worse, place her across the battlefield beneath Voldemort's banner, and every victory becomes fragile, every narrow escape suddenly uncertain. The troll, the stone, the time-turner, the Horcrux hunt, each success begins to look like a coin toss they were never meant to win without her. In this alternate history, we will watch those familiar events tilt and splinter one by one as the smartest witch of her age quietly chooses a different path. The question is simple. The consequences are not. What breaks Hermione Granger enough to betray Harry Potter, and what remains of the world when she does? To understand that break, the story must first define the word that will haunt it: betrayal. Not as a single treacherous act, but as a slow unspooling of loyalty, a grave being dug one shovelful at a time until the friendship inside is no longer recognizable. There are many ways for Hermione Granger to turn. She can abandon Harry emotionally, standing beside him in the common room while quietly stepping away in every decision that matters. She can defect ideologically, choosing the Ministry and its laws over Dumbledore's whispered warnings and Harry's instincts. And, at the far end of the spectrum, she can collaborate outright with Voldemort, offering not her wand first, but her mind. This is important. Our Hermione does not leap from Gryffindor's sofa to Death Eater's side in a single night. The grave was empty long before anyone realized something had died. The timeline of that emptying begins early. In Philosopher's Stone, the seed is not the troll. It is the way Harry and Ron treat rule-breaking as exhilarating, while Hermione treats rules as the fragile scaffolding holding a dangerous world in place. In Chamber of Secrets, when adults fail to protect Muggle-borns, she learns that laws are only as moral as the hands that enforce them. By Prisoner of Azkaban, the Firebolt conflict becomes more than a quarrel over a broom. It is the first time she chooses institutional safety over Harry's trust and discovers that he will forgive her anyway. From there, our primary divergence runs like a crack beneath the floorboards, widening from Prisoner of Azkaban through Order of the Phoenix. Each year, she watches authority fail in a new way. A convicted murderer sheltered in the shadows, a resurrected Dark Lord denied. A ministry that prefers a comforting replica of the truth to the dangerous reality that Voldemort is alive. Not Dumbledore, who had withheld prophecies and plans. Not Hagrid, who had trusted monsters and half-truths. Not Sirius, who had chosen reckless loyalty over careful strategy. In that gathering disillusionment, Hermione begins to believe that someone must be relentlessly rational, even if it hurts. The emotional core of her betrayal is not hatred, it is certainty. She becomes convinced that she sees the pattern more clearly than Harry ever could. That the real danger is an untrained boy carrying a prophecy like a lit match through a field of dry grass. What if, to protect the world, the savior has to be contained, redirected, even sacrificed? When love and being right come into conflict, she chooses being right. Structurally, we will walk this descent in order, rereading each book as a ledger of small fractures. We will pause at 3 critical points where she might plausibly snap. The Triwizard Chaos, the Dar's collapse under Umbridge, the Ministry's war on truth. At each, we will ask what choice a more disillusioned Hermione makes. Because this is not only about strategy and magic, it is about the shattering of trust, the hollowing out of the Golden Trio until only 2 remain, still using plans she designed long after she has turned those same designs against them. Hermione Granger's betrayal does not begin with a shouted argument or a wand raised in open defiance. It begins much earlier, in quieter places where strengths harden into something sharper. This is important. Hermione's brilliance is unquestioned. Logic like a blade, an encyclopedic memory that can summon the right charm from the right book at the right moment. A moral seriousness that makes even professors straighten unconsciously when she speaks. She is the one who sees patterns, who reads the fine print of magic and law, who turns chaos into a plan. Yet every light in this story throws a shadow. Her logic becomes inflexibility when the world refuses to fit the rules she has memorized. Her knowledge curdles into contempt for those who have not read what she has read. Her moral gravity slides almost imperceptibly into self-righteousness and a quiet conviction that other people's objections are obstacles to be managed, not truths to be heard. Spew is the first hairline crack made visible. She sees house elves in the Hogwarts kitchens and does not merely feel pity, she drafts a manifesto. Badges, petitions, knitted hats left like landmines of liberation. She never asks the elves what they want in any meaningful way. She does not accept their answer when they give it. Consent becomes optional when she has decided the cause is just. Those who do not share her urgency, Ron with his jokes, Harry with his exhaustion, are treated not as friends with different limits, but as disappointments. In another story, this is endearing zeal. In this one, it is rehearsal. A pattern of deciding that she knows best, and that those she loves will simply have to catch up. The pattern deepens with her comfort around extreme measures. She will imprison Rita Skeeter in a jar, holding a human being as an illegal animagus in glass, because the story must be controlled. She will blackmail with information when she deems it necessary. Later, she will stand over her parents' photographs and erase herself from their minds, rewriting their entire lives with a wand movement and a trembling whisper. The grave was empty, but it might as well have been. The daughter they knew is gone, replaced by a carefully constructed replica who exists only in her own memory. These are unilateral decisions taken in secret, justified by love and fear and a belief that she alone sees the full board. At first, she is a creature of rules. Points, punishments, the ministry's decrees quoted chapter and verse. Then Hogwarts becomes a battlefield and she learns to break rules, for Dumbledore, for Harry, for a war that seems to demand exceptions. Not Dumbledore, who had cultivated her trust with partial truths and carefully rationed information, expecting obedience when the time came. What happens when that trust fractures? But her reverence for law and institutional order remains. When the ministry's proclamations about Harry as a destabilizing force begin to sound not like propaganda, but like confirmation of doubts she has buried for years. If Hermione Granger ever became convinced that Harry was not a savior, but a future Dark Lord, or a reckless weapon Dumbledore was wielding without restraint, how far would she go to stop him? How many minds would she alter? How many secrets would she trade? And who would she decide deserved to know the truth about the boy who lived before she moved to make sure he did not live long enough to prove her fears right? So we go back, not to prophecy, not to war, but to a bathroom that smells of stone and fear and troll breath. The night the Golden Trio is born. The night the first fracture appears. Hermione Granger is 11, and her world is still orderly. Rules are clear, books are reliable, adults are competent. Hogwarts is a sanctuary carved out of the chaos of magic. Then a mountain of grey flesh swings a club at her head, and two boys who mock her and ignore her run toward the danger instead of away. The story says this is friendship. That is true. It is not the whole truth. Because when McGonagall demands an explanation, Hermione lies. She does it clumsily, too quickly, but she does it. This is important. The girl who has built her identity on perfect answers and correct procedures feels, for the first time, the sharp, bright heat of bending reality with words instead of wands. She discovers that a lie, placed carefully, can become a kind of charm. It shields Harry and Ron from expulsion, reshapes the narrative, makes recklessness look almost noble. No one notices the way she goes quiet afterward. Not Dumbledore, who had already begun to file her under reliable asset. Not Hagrid, who had fed Harry dragon secrets as though secrets were sweets. Harry and Ron celebrate their narrow escape. Hermione measures it. She has broken her own law, and the sky has not fallen. The grave of her old certainty is shallow, but it has been dug. The stone changes everything. Fluffy, a three-headed beast left behind a door any first year could find. Devil's snare that can be stilled by first-year herbology. A room full of flying keys that yield to a broom and luck. A chessboard that demands sacrifice from children. A logic puzzle that she, not Harry, solves because magic bows to courage, but potions bow to thought. Hogwarts is not a fortress. It is a corridor of tests that children can pass. Adults have built a gauntlet to guard an artifact of unimaginable power and then left it thin enough for an 11-year-old with a library card and two reckless friends to slip through. The grave was empty where her faith in institutional safety used to lie. She watches Harry and Ron charge forward, again and again, with half-understood clues and no plan beyond survival. Harry on a broom chasing a rogue bludger. Harry with a wand facing a fully grown troll. Harry walking into fire for a stone he barely comprehends. One boy wrapped in fame, luck, and something Dumbledore will not name, dragging others into the blast radius of his life. After the hospital wing, when the sweets have been eaten and the laughter has faded, Hermione does something almost no one at Hogwarts does. She researches. Quietly, systematically, Nicholas Flamel. The Philosopher's Stone. The history of alchemical immortality and the wars it has sparked. She reads about wizards who tried to live forever, about bodies that became husks while their owners clung to power, about replicas of life that were not truly alive, and she notices the omissions. No clear explanation of why Dumbledore, of all people, was entrusted with such an object. No honest account of how close Voldemort came, how many knew, how many were kept in the dark. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated a school year around a secret he never disclosed. Not Hagrid, who had carried a dragon egg into a castle full of children. Each omission becomes an entry in a ledger she keeps only in her mind. Who lies? Who withholds? Who risks others without consent? Harry is on that list now, however gently she writes his name. So is Dumbledore. So, in a quieter, more painful script, is Hermione herself. Because she has already proven she will violate her own principles for the people she chooses. Pattern interrupt. What if that ledger, begun in first year, is the true origin of her betrayal, not any single later argument or wartime horror? What if every detention, every dragon, every near death becomes another mark on a page only she can see? By the time the stone is destroyed and the term ends, something fundamental has shifted. Hermione still smiles on the train home, still buys sweets, still listens as Harry and Ron retell their adventure with embellishments and laughter. Yet beneath the surface, she is no longer merely grateful to belong. She is auditing the cost of that belonging. She has seen that Hogwarts is fallible, that adults can be careless with children, that Harry will walk into fire if no one stops him. She has lied for him once. She has watched him almost die more than once. And as the countryside blurs past the window, Hermione Granger begins, very quietly, to wonder whether the real danger in this world is Dark Lords who announce themselves, or boys who do not yet understand what they are capable of becoming. The train pulls into September, and the question that began at the window hardens into a quiet conviction as the year unfolds. If adults will not keep children safe, who will? The answer, in Hermione's mind, is already beginning to sound like a sentence. She will. The chamber year is remembered by many as a mystery, a thrilling story of monsters and messages and narrow escapes. For Hermione, it is something else. It is a slow tightening of a noose she can feel but cannot see, a sense that the very walls of Hogwarts are turning against her. The first message on the stone, letters written like wounds, does not read as adventure. It reads as a death notice delivered early. She walks the corridors and understands with a clarity that makes her stomach twist that someone has built this place to kill people like her. The legend of Slytherin is not a tale. It is a plan. Centuries old, waiting for the right heir and the right moment. This is important. The professors speak of precautions and patrols, but every new attack proves the same terrible truth: the school cannot protect her. Not Dumbledore, who had promised safety with that grave, unshakable voice. Not Hagrid, who had once carried a baby from ruins, but is now dragged away in chains while the real threat moves untouched. In that atmosphere, her research into the basilisk is not a charming quirk of curiosity. It is triage. She locks herself in the library as if it were a bunker, tearing through bestiaries and histories with a desperation that leaves ink on her fingers and sleep out of reach. If the adults are misreading the pattern, if they are content to wait while Muggle-borns are hunted, then she will read it correctly. She will think clearly when others are dulled by fear and tradition. She begins to believe that intellect is not simply a gift. It is a weapon she is morally required to wield. The Polyjuice potion becomes the proof of that belief. She breaks rules in layers, theft from Snape's private stores, brewing a dangerous potion in a bathroom, risking permanent damage to her own body. All for information. All for the possibility of knowing who the enemy is. The grave was empty on Halloween. Now the pedestal of rules is empty as well. If a charm or a potion can produce a convincing replica of safety, what matters is not the rule, but the result. Information justifies any means. This is important, because later, betrayal will not feel like treachery. It will feel like surgery. Then, silence, stone, a mirror bright flash of eyes, and nothing. Petrification removes her from the story, but it does not remove the consequences when she wakes. She learns, again, that Harry has gone below, that Harry has faced a monster, that Harry has survived by courage and chance and some wild, untamed magic that bends around him. How many times, she wonders, can the world rely on that pattern before it breaks? How many times can she watch him walk unarmed into the grave and come back alive by accident? In the background, the Ministry moves. Fudge arrives not as a savior, but as a man managing panic, eager for a culprit he can parade. Hagrid is taken. Dumbledore is removed. No one asks what it feels like to be a Muggle-born reading threats written in blood. The institution does not see her terror, it sees a public relations problem. A seed takes root. If these are the people who make the laws, then laws are not sacred. They are tools. If the Ministry can so easily scapegoat and silence, perhaps it can also be used. Perhaps the only rational path, one day, will be to place Harry himself inside that machinery, to reform him, to restrain him, to control the unpredictable force that keeps hurling itself at monsters and surviving. Not because she hates him, because she is starting to fear what happens to the world if no one ever stops him. The second year ends with celebrations and relieved laughter. But Hermione's private conclusion is far colder. Hogwarts is not a sanctuary. The Ministry is not a guardian. Harry is not a stable solution. And somewhere in the quiet space between those realizations, the future traitor of Harry Potter begins to sketch her first faint outline of what control might one day require. Third year is where the hairline fractures become visible. This is where irritation hardens into injury. This is where Hermione Granger begins to understand that doing what is right in this world of broken adults and unstable boys will mean being called a traitor long before she ever earns the title. The firebolt arrives like a dream. Sleek wood, forbidden speed, an anonymous gift that feels like proof that Harry is loved by forces beyond the grave. The grave was empty, but the fantasy of protection lingers around him like a charm. Hermione does the arithmetic no one else will do. Sirius Black has escaped. Sirius Black is allegedly hunting Harry. A cursed broom is not melodrama, it is probability. So she goes to McGonagall. She breaks the moment, breaks the illusion, breaks Harry's joy in the name of his survival. This is important. In canon, it is framed as meddling, as overreach, as the act of a girl who trusts rules more than friendship. In this darker reading, it becomes a template. When safety and loyalty collide, Hermione chooses safety and accepts the accusation of betrayal as the cost. Not Dumbledore, who had placed the boy who lived in a cupboard, comes between Harry and his recklessness. Not Hagrid, who had handed him a photo album and a dragon egg, asks the difficult preventative questions. Hermione does, and Harry does not forgive her quickly. Then the cat and the rat begin their slow, grinding war. Crookshanks stalks Scabbers. Ron's fear and grief are loud, immediate, boy-shaped. Hermione's evidence is quiet, circumstantial, book-shaped. She has read about Animagi. She has watched the map. She has seen enough to suspect that the story of a pet rat is not the whole truth. Yet every time she refuses to muzzle Crookshanks or to apologize for believing her own eyes, she is told she is choosing an animal over a friend. What lesson does that teach a mind already primed for systems and patterns? That insisting on the deeper truth means standing alone. That loyalty, in practice, is often a demand to ignore what you know. And then, in the Shrieking Shack, the world splits. Sirius is not the mass murderer. Pettigrew is not the grave-bound victim. The Ministry, for 12 years, has caged an innocent man and elevated a cowardly traitor to martyrdom. The story was wrong. The records were wrong. The adults were wrong. Hermione's remaining faith in institutional justice does not merely crack. It falls in on itself like a ruined tower. If the official narrative of that Halloween night can be a replica, what else is a lie? Around this same year, Dumbledore and McGonagall place a time turner in her hand. They weaponize her diligence, her hunger to learn, her belief that effort can fix anything. Lily was a charms prodigy, but here is a 15-year-old girl trusted with a device that can rewrite hours of reality because she asked to take too many classes. What does that do to a mind already convinced that if she just works harder, plans better, she can repair what others ruin? By the lake and in the tower, she and Harry save Buckbeak, save Sirius, bend time to rescue men condemned by adult failure. She stumbles back to the hospital wing, exhausted, shaking, having watched herself move through the same night twice. And once again, Harry has chosen to risk everything for a man he barely knows, while the headmaster watches from the margins and calls it necessary. She looks at Harry, pale in the lamplight, and at the quiet, complicit faces of the adults. She understands something new and terrible. The world will always ask this boy to die for it. The world will always ask her to make sure he survives long enough to be offered up again. In that realization, the future betrayer takes another step. If no one sane will take the weight from Harry, perhaps the only mercy left is to take Harry from the weight. Hermione Granger learns the shape of the world on quiet nights, not battlefields. The grave is not yet literal, but the weight is the same. A boy marked for death, a girl marked to keep him alive long enough to reach it. In the weeks after third year, when the time turner is returned and Buckbeak's escape has faded into whispered rumor, she does something she has never done before. She writes a letter she does not intend to send. This is important. 4 sheets of parchment, cramped with ink, where she lets the story run without editing herself into the patient, sensible friend everyone expects. She writes that she felt alone, that when she tried to warn them about the firebolt, she was sneered at, frozen out of the dormitory, treated as a traitor to their fun. She writes about Crookshanks, about being mocked and dismissed while Ron chose his rat's grave over her fear, as if her logic and her care were a kind of attack. She writes about the time turner, about how the magic that shattered her sleep and her sanity was treated as a convenient charm for homework rather than a slow violence to her mind. No one had asked if she was all right. Not Dumbledore, who had signed the form. Not McGonagall, who had watched the shadows under her eyes deepen. Not Hagrid, who had been too lost in his own trial to see hers. She knew they all had reasons. Reasons did not make her less tired. In another branch of the tale, she considers a different escape, Beauxbatons, with its order and elegance, where rules are carved like runes and not tossed aside whenever a famous boy needs an exception. Or, further still, a return to the Muggle world, to examinations and libraries and danger that obeys physics instead of prophecy. She imagines packing her trunk, writing a final neat note, leaving this irrational country of moving staircases and moving goalposts behind. The plan is simple. The courage to enact it is not. Why does she stay in the canon we know? Love first, a stubborn, unglamorous loyalty to the lonely boy on the train and the infuriating boy with the broken wand. Then the intoxicating knowledge that her mind matters here, that without her there is no devil's snare escape, no polyjuice infiltration, no Patronus-lit night by the lake. Being needed is its own kind of binding charm. But what if one thing shifted? One sharper word from Harry about the firebolt. One more adult telling her to be quiet, to trust that the grown-ups had a plan when she could see with brutal clarity that they did not. This is important because betrayal at this first fork would not be defection to Voldemort. It would be absence, a grave where her guidance should have been, a replica of the trio with its mind removed. Here, the betrayal would be abandonment, Hermione stepping out of Harry's story, leaving him and Ron to face a war without their strategist, their conscience, their living map of the castle and its secrets. The grave was empty, but so was the space beside him on the third-floor corridor in the library, under the invisibility cloak. Not Sirius, who had his own ghosts, not any member of the Order, could truly replace what she took with her. Our main alternate universe will not take this quieter path. It will choose something darker, more active, more terrible. Yet this near miss matters. because it proves that by the end of third year, Hermione is already standing on the threshold, already testing the idea that she might walk away from the boy the world has chosen to sacrifice. And if she can imagine walking away once, what happens when someone finally offers her a different story and the power to rewrite it? The offer comes in blue fire and shattered certainty. Harry's name bursts from the goblet, the hall freezes, and in this world, Hermione Granger does not leap to her feet in outraged defense. She goes still. She starts to calculate. The rules had been clear. No under-17s, powerful age lines. Dumbledore's own magic circled that cup like a warded grave around a dangerous relic. And Hermione, who has watched Harry fly a broom he should not have been able to ride, conjure a Patronus he should not have been able to cast, survive dangers no child should be anywhere near, feels a cold, treacherous thought rise, he has broken the impossible before. Why not this? This is important. She watches him at the staff table, pale and bewildered, and another thought follows, softer but more poisonous. He is always at the center. Trolls, basilisk, dementors, the story always curves back to Harry Potter. Alive when he should be dead, chosen when he should be overlooked. How many times can that be accident? In the weeks that follow, the strain that canon scattered between them condenses into something heavier. Ron's resentment burns openly. Hermione's burns inward. She is stretched thin between Victor Kroom's unexpected attention, Ron's sulks, and the looming lethal tournament. Harry's danger is no longer a distant possibility. It has a schedule, tasks, scores. She begins to wonder whether some part of him needs that. Whether he is, in ways he does not admit, addicted to being singular, to stepping beyond the safety of the plan. So she does what she always does. She investigates, she studies the goblet, the age line, the accounts of past champions. She questions professors with careful, respectful persistence. Not Dumbledore, who had drawn the line himself, and whose word would end the inquiry before it began, but Flitwick, McGonagall, even Moody with his growled warnings about powerful magic and clever cheats. Every answer circles the same abyss. No known charm could have forced a fourth champion without leaving some trace. No obvious tampering, no clear external hand. The absence of proof begins to feel like proof. If no one else could have done it, if the goblet itself seems a flawless replica of every description in the record, then either there is an unknown enemy of unimaginable subtlety, or Harry is not telling her everything. Which possibility is more likely? Into that doubt walks Rita Skeeter. Hermione's first instinct is fury. The articles slash at her, twist her, turn her into a caricature. Yet when Rita offers her quill and promises to set the record straight, Hermione hesitates. Here is someone who believes the rules matter, at least on parchment. Here is someone who will listen when she says Harry is under pressure, that the school is unsafe, that the truth is being buried beneath spectacle. She talks, carefully, she thinks, about Harry's past adventures, his temper, his isolation, about his nightmares and flashes of anger. She intends to defend him, to explain him. On the page it curdles. Harry becomes volatile, attention-seeking, unstable, the grave was empty, and Rita fills it with this. By the time the first task ends, Hermione has made a quiet decision. Until she has evidence, she will not assume Harry is innocent. She will watch, she will record, she will catalogue every inconsistency, every reckless choice, and prepare for the possibility that her best friend is lying to her and to the world. And once she starts keeping that private ledger, What happens when someone far darker than Rita asks to see it? Someone is always watching at Hogwarts, but not everyone is watching for the same thing. The grave of trust between Hermione and Harry has not yet been filled in. The soil is loose, unsettled, waiting. This is important. Because in that unsettled ground, other eyes begin to see possibility rather than tragedy. Voldemort does not understand love. He never has. But he understands intelligence with a cold, almost reverent clarity. In his private calculus, a mind that can reshape the world is more dangerous than any wand, and a Muggle-born witch who consistently outperforms pure blood heirs is an affront and an invitation in the same breath. Hermione Granger, standing too close to the boy who will not die, becomes both a threat to be neutralized and a tool to be repurposed. Not Dumbledore, who had long ago begun to rely on Hermione as Harry's moral compass, truly sees the fracture forming. Not Hagrid, who had always trusted that kindness and friendship would be enough mortar to hold the trio together. But there are others who notice the way Hermione's questions grow sharper when the Ministry lies, the way her eyes harden when Dumbledore withholds the truth yet again. Imagine a younger, subtler Barty Crouch Jr., buried in a false identity years earlier than canon, walking Hogwarts corridors as a nondescript assistant or visiting scholar of magical lore. Imagine a Slytherin professor with Death Eater sympathies, less theatrical than Snape, more patient than Lucius, watching Hermione argue with authority and take meticulous notes on every institutional failure. They see not a swotty girl, but a strategist in chrysalis, disillusioned with incompetence and hungry for systemic change rather than heroic improvisation. The opening move is not a dark mark in the sky. It is a folded scrap of parchment left in the library, anonymous, containing a citation to a book she has never been allowed to see. It is a volume on early Muggle-born persecution that appears misshelved, its margins quietly annotated with questions she has already begun to ask herself. Why are Muggle-borns registered but not protected? Why does the Wizengamot cling to bloodline privilege under the banner of justice? Then, a conversation overheard but carefully staged, in which older students dissect the hypocrisy of a war where the light side sends children into danger while the Ministry rewrites the story to protect its own grave reputation. They speak of magical law, of the way Dumbledore's private army of students skirts every regulation she has spent years respecting. They call it what she has not yet dared to name, using children as soldiers. Hermione's love of knowledge has always been her refuge. Now it becomes the hook. She is offered, slowly, access to texts that are not simply banned for their curses, but for their ideas. Coherent, ruthlessly logical critiques of the Ministry's structure. Analyses of Dumbledore's concentration of power. A theory of order that promises safety through regulation rather than through prophecy and sacrifice. The grave was empty, these books suggest, not of bodies, but of honest governance. Lily was a charms prodigy, but Hermione is something different, an architect of systems in waiting. When someone flatters her not with promises of glory, but with the implication that she alone is capable of understanding hard, unvarnished truths, the temptation is not crude, it is rational. It feels like finally being treated as an adult in a world that has been happy to use her work while dismissing her doubts. If the offer is not power but order, not cruelty, but a meticulously structured piece, does she listen? And once she starts reading, once she starts attending those quiet, deniable conversations under the pretext of debate, How long before observing becomes advising, and advising becomes inescapably collaborating? Somewhere in the castle, a new ledger begins, not of Harry's flaws, but of the system's. Voldemort does not need to write in it. He only needs to wait until Hermione offers him a perfect, terrible summary. The third task approached like a closing fist. The maze rose on the Quidditch pitch, hedges towering, paths shifting, a living grave of green that would swallow 4 champions and return, at best, 1. This is important. In canon, Hermione is Harry's anchor here, his strategist, his relentless believer. In this story, she is something colder. She still meets him in the library. She still sketches possible creatures, rehearses counter-curses, murmurs through wand movements until his wrist aches. But the warmth is gone. Her questions are precise, almost clinical, as if she is revising for an exam rather than preparing a friend to face unknown magic that might kill him. When he jokes weakly about dying in the maze, she does not scold him or snap that he is not going to die. She notes instead that panic will waste oxygen and that he should remember the bubblehead charm. He feels the absence before he can name it. Not a shouted accusation, not open hostility, a withdrawal, a professional distance where there had once been unthinking loyalty. He looks for the girl who once brewed illegal polyjuice in a bathroom for him, who once set a teacher on fire for him, and finds instead a careful, skeptical mind taking notes on his fear. The graveyard itself does not change. The cup is still a portkey. Cedric still falls. Voldemort's body still rises from the cauldron, pale as bone, terrible and newly alive. Wands still lock in that impossible beam of light. Shadows still spill from the grave like accusations. The grave was empty of comfort then, and it is empty now. But the meaning of that night is rewritten elsewhere, in a castle that does not see what happens among the tombstones. Hermione is not there when Harry screams under the Cruciatus. She is not there when he clings to his wand as if it is the last thread to sanity. She is in the stands, then in the chaos, then in the blur of ministry officials and headlines and statements. By the time Harry wakes in the hospital wing, the story has already begun to fracture. The ministry calls it an accident. Rumor calls it hysteria. Not Dumbledore, who had always warned of Voldemort's return, but Fudge, who has the prophet and the law, steps forward with his own plan for the truth. And Hermione, who has spent a year cataloguing institutional rot, hears both versions and feels the ground tilt. She visits Harry late, when the wing is quiet and Cedric's bed is an untouched. Awful replica of the boy who will never lie in it again. Harry's voice is raw as he tells her everything: the grave, the ritual, the Death Eaters, the duel. He is shaking, he is certain. She listens, she believes the pain. She does not fully believe the conclusion. "I want to believe you," she says at last. But we need evidence. Something in him breaks at the word "we." Once, it had meant the 3 of them against the world. Now it sounds like a committee that might vote on whether his trauma is admissible. He turns away. She does not reach for his hand. That night, Harry stands at a window in Gryffindor Tower, staring at the sky over the Forbidden Forest, knowing down to the marrow that Voldemort is back, that the world is already burning, and no one can smell the smoke. On the other side of the castle, in a quiet corridor near the library, Hermione leans against cold stone and stares at that same indifferent sky. wondering if grief has broken Harry's sense of reality or if someone somewhere is using him as a charm-drunk messenger to destabilize the fragile order she has just begun to understand. Both of them feel alone. Both of them are right about different parts of the truth. Neither realizes that the distance between their windows is now wide enough for a Dark Lord to walk through. And when he does, he will not come wearing a mask or a mark. He will come wearing an offer. He comes wearing an offer. But before that offer can be made, Hogwarts itself becomes the proving ground where Hermione Granger's faith is quietly broken. The grave of childhood is dug in 5th year. This is important. It is dug not by Voldemort, but by adults who call themselves protectors and then hand wands to children. When Hermione proposes Dumbledore's army in this timeline, the name tastes wrong even as she says it. In canon, it is an act of defiance, a secret militia born from teenage courage. Here, she is too well read, too precise with history, not to recognize what it really is, the conscription of minors because every adult institution has failed. She watches younger students copy stunning spells with shaking hands and realizes they are not playing at soldiers. They are replicas of a war she has only read about, drilled into formation in unused classrooms while the headmaster disappears into his own designs. Umbridge's regime makes the pattern undeniable. The Ministry's pink office becomes a small, upholstered tyranny, a demonstration of how law can be twisted into a weapon. Hermione sees detentions that draw blood, decrees that strangle speech, a woman who smiles while banning defensive magic. But what haunts her is not only Umbridge. It is the empty chair at the staff table. Dumbledore is gone. Not Dumbledore, who had vowed to protect students. Not Dumbledore, who had recruited Harry at 11 into a story of prophecy and grave danger. He leaves a 15-year-old lightning rod to absorb every blow meant for him. Hermione begins to suspect a terrible symmetry. The Ministry uses rules to break them. Dumbledore uses secrets. Both sides expect children to stand in the crossfire. The Department of Mysteries shatters any lingering illusion that this is still a school year. She goes because Harry is certain, because the visions feel real, because loyalty has become a reflex stronger than fear. In the echoing halls of prophecy and spinning planets, she is nearly killed by a curse she never should have faced. The floor is cold, the pain is blinding. For a moment, she does not know if she is alive or already a name on a memorial she has not yet seen. In the hospital wing, staring at white sheets and the trembling of her own hands, the pattern resolves. Harry's visions, Dumbledore's silence, her own willingness to follow without enough information. The plan, whatever it is, did not include her survival as a fixed point. After Sirius falls through the veil, she moves. This is the pattern interrupt. She does not simply grieve, she requests, then forces an audience. Behind the locked door of the headmaster's office, Hermione asks the question no one else has ever demanded an honest answer to: why did you keep him ignorant? Dumbledore talks of love, of timing, of burdens Harry must bear. He never quite says the word sacrifice, but Hermione hears it in every pause. The grave was empty, she realizes, not of bodies, but of adult responsibility. They have buried it in Harry instead. His evasions confirm what she already knew in her bones. Harry is a piece on a board, and so is she. She leaves that office with a new vow. She will not yet betray Harry. She loves him too much for that. but she will never again allow Dumbledore or anyone to use him unchecked. If the only way to save him from a destiny scripted by old men is to stand in his way, then she will become his opposition. And somewhere beyond the castle walls, a Dark Lord feels the first faint crack in the golden trio and adjusts his offer accordingly. The first real fracture comes quietly. No curses, no shouting, no graveyard duel. Just parchment, ink, and a girl who decides that if no one else will save Harry from the Dark Lord inside his head, then she will. After the Department of Mysteries, Hermione cannot unsee the image, Harry wild-eyed, charging down a corridor because a vision told him to. Sirius falling. The veil swallowing him like water. This is important. In this alternate fifth year, she watches Harry wake in the hospital wing, scar burning, magic shuddering around him like a storm that never quite breaks. And she understands something terrible. He is not only a target, he is a conduit. So she makes a plan. Not Dumbledore, who had vanished from the school and from Harry's daily life when guidance was most needed. Not Hagrid, who had always believed that love and loyalty were enough protection against any darkness. Not Sirius, who had encouraged Harry's recklessness because it looked so much like James. None of them, she decides, are being rational. Hermione Granger will be. She begins with McGonagall. A quiet knock. A late evening. She reports the visions in meticulous detail. The corridors, the doors, the snake, the grave-like arch in the Department of Mysteries. She tells the story of how easily Harry was lured, how completely he believed the replica of Sirius in his mind. She does not say betrayal. She says concern. She uses words like monitoring, containment, protective wards. She suggests carefully that perhaps the Order should know every time Harry dreams. McGonagall listens. The Order responds, extra charms are woven into Harry's dormitory. Subtle restraints around Floo access, around owls, around where he is allowed to wander at night. When his scar flares, adults appear as if conjured. They ask questions he never voiced aloud. They know too much. The truth breaks over him, not with a scream, but with a sentence half overheard outside the Transfiguration classroom. Miss Granger's reports have been invaluable. Reports, plural, detailed, ongoing, he pieces it together with the same grim precision Hermione once used on homework. The nightmares he whispered in the common room, the fears he confessed in the library, the moments he admitted he felt something inside him that was not entirely his own. All of it carried away like contraband and handed to the very structures he mistrusts. He feels stripped, exposed, humiliated. In the empty classroom where he confronts her, his voice is low. It is not a row, it is an execution. Hermione stands her ground. She says that love is not indulgence, that when a cursed object is too dangerous, you lock it away until it can be safely handled. Harry flinches because he understands exactly who is the cursed object in this comparison. Ron is there, caught between them like a boy at the edge of a duel. Publicly, he chooses Harry. Of course he does. The trio was built on that axis. But in the quiet afterward, he looks at Hermione with something like understanding and something like fear, because he too has watched Harry's scar bleed and his eyes go distant. The golden trio becomes 2 and 1. Hermione walks the corridors alone. The library, once their shared sanctuary, becomes her exile. At a corner table, beneath the watchful gaze of dust and lamplight, she opens a fresh roll of parchment and writes a heading in her careful, precise hand, Intervention Protocols for Possessed Subjects. She underlines intervention twice. She does not write betrayal, she never will. For Harry, the word is simpler. It is treason. And somewhere in the castle's ancient stones, the magic itself seems to rearrange around that new, silent war. The magic shifts. The war narrows. And somewhere in the shadows of that new, silent conflict, another watcher steps forward. Severus Snape has been watching Hermione Granger for years. He has watched her hand rise before anyone else even understands the question. He has watched her brew potions that in another life might have earned his grudging respect. More recently, he has watched something else. The slight delay before she obeys an order. The tightening of her jaw when Dumbledore withholds the full story. The way her eyes follow Harry with a mixture of loyalty and alarm. This is important. He knows the signs of disillusionment. He wears them like a second robe. Not Dumbledore, who had always believed that children could bear prophecy if wrapped in enough rhetoric. Not Hagrid, who had always trusted the headmaster's kindness as if it were a charm against error. Snape sees what they refuse to see, the brightest witch of her age beginning to doubt the script she has been given. The conversation happens after class. It is never announced. It simply materializes, the way danger often does, in the empty space between one bell and the next. The dungeon is quiet, the air heavy with the sour, sweet residue of failed antidotes. Hermione lingers over her cauldron, pretending to tidy. Snape's voice cuts the silence like a blade. Miss Granger. A word. Short, soft, deadly. He does not waste time. He tells her in that cold, precise tone that Dumbledore is reckless with children, that the headmaster has a long history of placing students in the path of curses and calling it education. He suggests that Harry is becoming dangerously like his father, reckless and adored, convinced that survival is proof of wisdom. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. Each sentence lands with the weight of a stone on a grave. Then comes the pitch. It is not what she expects. He does not ask her to join the Dark Lord. He does not speak of mark or master. Instead, he speaks of protection, of containment, of the necessity of guiding a boy who believes himself chosen, feeding him only the truth he can bear, obstructing, if required, his more suicidal impulses. He speaks as if this is not betrayal but medicine, bitter and necessary. Hermione listens. She is repulsed by his cruelty, by the way he spits James Potter's name, by the quiet contempt when he describes Harry's courage as vanity in replica. And yet she cannot quite dismiss the kernel of truth burning at the center of his words. Had she not already begun drafting protocols to stop Harry if he were possessed? Had she not already imagined herself as a counterweight, a secret hand on the scale between two old wizards using a boy as their board? She asks him, finally, whose plan this is. His or Dumbledore's? Snape's eyes reveal nothing. The grave was empty. The answer never comes. The ambiguity is its own trap. If she cannot trust Dumbledore, and she cannot trust Snape, whom can she trust except her own judgment? And if her judgment says that to keep Harry alive, she may one day have to stand against him, what, precisely, does that make her? Somewhere far above the dungeons, Harry laughs at something Ron says, unaware that a new, invisible order has just been offered in his name. He will not stay unaware for long. He will not stay unaware for long. The warning arrives bound in cracked leather, inked in a stranger's hand, smelling faintly of dust and something metallic. The half-blood prince does not walk into Harry's life, he bleeds into it, line by line, margin by margin. In canon, Hermione's suspicion is sharp but still domestic. She is jealous of a book, irritated by shortcuts, offended as a scholar. Here, the emotion that takes root is older and colder. Dread, because she watches with the eye of someone who has catalogued his every flaw, as Harry's magic tightens, focuses, becomes efficient in ways that do not feel like growth so much as weaponization. Instructions whispered from an anonymous mentor who knows exactly which corners to cut and which nerves to strike. This is important. Harry has always been powerful, but his power was noisy, impulsive, wrapped in the clumsiness of a boy who still flinched from the grave weight of what he could do. The prince pares that away. Suddenly, there is a charm that pins an opponent more cleanly, a counter-curse that snaps faster, a notation that turns a standard hex into something that leaves darker bruises. Hermione watches him in lessons, sees the way his wand moves now with a kind of borrowed certainty, and she realizes the margins of that book are not commentary. They are a curriculum. Sectum Sempra is the exam he never meant to take. One moment, a bathroom duel. The next, Draco Malfoy is on the tiles, cut open by invisible blades, blood spreading in obscene, living replicas of the diagrams Hermione once saw in a dusty healing text. Harry is horrified, yes, but Hermione sees something else beneath the horror, how quickly it happened. How easily. Given power without guidance, he became lethally dangerous in a breath. She does not let it go. While Harry broods and Ron tries to forget the sound of Draco choking, Hermione turns to the only defense she trusts: research. Names, initials, handwriting samples, cross-referenced potions notes, old exam records, the faint echo of a boy who excelled in the very branches of magic respectable wizards pretended not to see. As she traces the prince toward a figure entangled with Death Eaters and forbidden work, the story clarifies. This is not a clever tutor. This is a lineage of darkness pressed into parchment. She begins to think of the book as a substance, not a source. Addictive, corrupting. Every time Harry reaches for it, every time his eyes flicker to the margins before his own memory, she feels the same chill she felt watching Tom Riddle's diary in second year. Only now, Harry is older, angrier, more willing to accept any plan that hurts the right enemies quickly enough, and above them, Dumbledore withers. Not Dumbledore, who had once seemed as unshakable as Hogwarts itself. This Dumbledore is thinner, hand blackened, gaze distant, disappearing with Harry on private missions that leave him more haunted each time. Hermione sees it with terrible clarity. The adults are not shielding Harry from the war. They are shaping him for it, a half-trained weapon entrusted to a dying general. The pattern interrupts her sleep. What if the visions intensify? What if the curses deepen? The disregard for collateral damage grows, and the boy who once spared Pettigrew begins to see blood as an acceptable cost. In the quiet of the library, between stacks that have always comforted her, Hermione drafts something she never thought she would need: a contingency. Not a neat plan, not yet, but a framework. Spells that could restrain him. Allies who might listen, even among those she once opposed. If Harry crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed, she will have to stand on the other side. To keep him alive. To keep everyone else alive. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow. Hermione does not know that story, but she feels the same hollowing. The sense that the protections she trusted are replicas, not realities. Somewhere above, Harry sleeps with the prince's book within reach, and Hermione closes her ink-stained hand around the first draft of betrayal. It will not be her last. The night the tower became a grave, something in Hermione Granger calcified. The dark mark hung above the castle like a wound that would not close. Students were herded, counted, whispered over. The corridors tasted of smoke and spellfire. Somewhere below, portraits keened, and the stone itself seemed to shudder, as if the magic that held Hogwarts together had been cracked along with the old man who had ruled its heights. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow. This is important. Hermione does not know that story, but she stands in a stairwell alcove and understands a different emptiness, the sudden vacuum where authority used to be. Dumbledore is gone. Not Dumbledore, who had always seemed like a fixed star, inscrutable but steady, the one adult she half-trusted to be running a plan larger than Harry's latest reckless charge. Now there is no fixed star, only falling. She hears fragments as professors hurry past, as members of the Order argue in low, ragged voices. Snape, killer, unforgivable, she hears Harry insist, wildeed, that it was arranged, that Snape was supposed to do it, that there was a plan. She hears the word Horcrux hissed like a curse, half remembered from library margins she was never allowed to see, and the phrase secret mission spoken with a kind of reverent dread. To Hermione, it sounds like confirmation, not comfort. The story is narrowing again around Harry Potter. Every whispered charm, every concealed artifact, every desperate plan seems to converge on one thin, stubborn boy who has already walked willingly into death's shadow more than once. How many times can he do it before the grave is not a metaphor but a fact? She runs the calculus in the quiet between heartbeats. With Dumbledore gone, who will restrain Harry's martyr complex? His terrifying readiness to trade his life for a prophecy he never chose? Not Hagrid, who had loved Harry from the moment he carried him from the ruins and would follow him anywhere. Not Sirius, who had once encouraged a 15-year-old to think of himself as a soldier, not a child. Not McGonagall, bound by duty and war and the need to keep the school barely standing. No one. Unless she does. In one version of this story, she chooses the tent, the forests, the slow starvation of the Horcrux hunt. In this version, she feels the pull of that choice and steps deliberately away from it. She will not vanish into the wilderness to chase fragments of soul on faith and guesswork. She will stay where the records are, where the laws are, where the Ministry, the Order, and even Voldemort's agents intersect in a web of information that someone cold enough can learn to read. Lily was a charms prodigy, but Hermione is something else, a strategist born in a library, raised on rules she has learned to bend until they break. If the world is intent on betting everything on Harry Potter, then someone must be prepared to hedge that wager. Later, when the castle is finally quiet, Hermione stands at a high window and watches the dark mark thin and fade. The sky is bruised, the tower stones still whispering with spent magic. She presses her hand to the glass as if she could touch the place where Dumbledore fell and feels only cold. She does not whisper, "I'll go with you." She whispers so softly that even the portraits do not hear, "I'll stop you before they kill you, or before you kill us all." It sounds, in the empty corridor, very much like a vow. She keeps that vow like a stone in her pocket, hard, cold, always there. By the time the funeral ends and the castle exhales its grief, Hermione Granger has already made a plan. Not a Gryffindor charge into darkness, a legal route, a structure. If Dumbledore's long game has ended in a broken body on the lawn, then she will find a different board, a different set of rules. This is important. She seeks out Kingsley Shacklebolt first, because he is both order and ministry, both grave and alive in the same tired gaze. Not Dumbledore, who had moved people like chess pieces. Not Hagrid, who had loved Harry with a giant's simple loyalty. Kingsley listens in a shuttered classroom while rain claws at the windows and the castle's magic thrums like a muted alarm. She does not call Harry dangerous. She calls him unregulated. She lays out with the same meticulous precision she once used to explain the Polyjuice potion, the story the Ministry has never fully understood, the prophecy, the repeated near-deaths, the way Voldemort's magic has wrapped itself around Harry's life like a noose. She speaks of the grave in the Department of Mysteries where Sirius fell, of the grave in the Little Hangleton Cemetery, of every place where Harry has walked too close to death and come back changed. She tells Kingsley what almost no one knows, that the Horcrux locket drove Ron to walk away, that Harry wakes shaking, that sometimes his eyes look not quite like his own. She does not yet use the word replica, but the idea is there, unspoken, that something wearing Harry's face might one day not be Harry at all. He is not a villain, she insists. He is a weapon left loaded on a table in a house that keeps catching fire. The Ministry is desperate. Fudge's cowardice has left a stain. Scrimgeour's war has left a ledger of names. They have lost auras, unspeakables, entire families. They have lost control of the story. And here is Hermione Granger, the smartest witch of her age, offering not betrayal but management. Oversight, a charm of containment woven from parchment and decree instead of wandlight. So they accept. Quietly, no public proclamation, no dramatic arrest. New travel restrictions appear, innocuous on their surface. Portkey regulations tighten. Certain flu connections that Harry favors develop unexplained delays. A special file is opened in a sterile office 2 floors below the Aura department, its folder marked with a simple initial. P. Hermione becomes the liaison. The word sounds clean. Neutral, she tells herself she is interceding, translating Harry to a frightened bureaucracy so they will not overreact and crush him. Each meeting with Kingsley ends with her saying, only this, nothing more. Each time she adds one more detail, one more pattern, one more fear. This is the moral slide, so gentle she can pretend it is not a descent. She is protecting him from himself, she repeats, from Dumbledore's ghostly hand still steering him toward some unseen grave. Yet every report she files, every secret she shares about his temper, his nightmares, the way his scar flares before an attack, moves her from friend to informant. One evening, the office is silent around her. The walls are a dull, bureaucratic beige, the air dry, the magic thin. A single lamp burns above a desk that is not hers, but might as well be. The parchment before her glows faintly, Ministry ink shimmering in expectation. Her quill hovers. The report is almost finished. One final line will authorize full surveillance, will bind Harry Potter to a web of monitoring charms and discreet tales for the rest of the war. She hesitates. Then, very slowly, she lowers the quill toward the space where she must write his name. What price is she about to pay for this protection? She does not write his name. Not yet. Instead, the pause lengthens, becomes a silence in which another, darker arithmetic begins. If Dumbledore is willing to turn Harry into a weapon, and the Ministry is willing to turn him into a suspect, then where? exactly is the side that is not using him? This is important. Because once Hermione allows herself to see all three great powers at war, the Order, the Ministry, and Voldemort, as pieces on the same corrupted board, the old story of light versus dark begins to fracture. The grave was empty, in a sense, not only in Godric's Hollow, but in her mind, the grave where she had buried doubt, buried the possibility that Dumbledore's wisdom might be something colder, more utilitarian. Not Dumbledore, who had withheld the prophecy, not Dumbledore, who had sent children into the Department of Mysteries, not Dumbledore, who had smiled with tired kindness and never once offered Harry a life that was simply his own. So when the back channel appears, it does not feel like seduction. It feels like research. It comes as a suggestion first from Snape in a corridor that smells faintly of potion smoke and old stone. A remark about other avenues of de-escalation delivered without inflection, left hanging like a half-finished charm. Later, perhaps, it is Yaxley in a ministry lift, his voice low as the doors shudder closed, mentioning that there are those on the Dark Lord's side who would prefer order to chaos, precision to massacre, if only they had the right information. A clandestine owl. A warded parchment. A promise that her insight will be used to minimize panic, not maximize slaughter. Pattern interrupt. Voldemort is presented not as a monster, but as a planner. Through intermediaries, a portrait of him emerges that is horrifying and yet, to her embattled intellect, disturbingly coherent. He is ruthless, yes, a pure-blood supremacist whose magic is a desecration of everything she once admired in Hogwarts. But he does not hinge his victory on the slow psychological destruction of a single traumatized boy. He does not build his plan on Harry's grave. He builds it on power, on fear, on a brutally clear objective that does not require Harry Potter to walk willingly to his death. This is the pitch that catches her, not mercy but structure, not compassion but the promise of fewer uncontrolled variables. If someone must win, should it be the faction that needs Harry's annihilation as a sacrament, or the one that merely needs his defeat? She draws lines. She refuses names, refuses locations, refuses to hand over anything that would lead to immediate, traceable deaths. She tells herself she is not a Death Eater. She is a strategist attempting to steer a catastrophe into something survivable. What she does offer is more insidious, analyses of Harry's moods, his likely responses to ministry decrees. The fractures in the Order when Remus and Snape argue, when Molly and Sirius disagree about how alive a boy is allowed to be in a war. She becomes, in secret, the world's foremost expert witness on Harry Potter's mind. From Voldemort's perspective, it is a revelation. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, not Sirius, who had loved him like a brother's son. It is Hermione Granger who provides something no curse, no prophecy, no stolen wand could ever grant. A living map of Harry's fears and loyalties drawn by the person who knows him best. He does not yet realize that a map can be used to corner or to escape. The map exists. The betrayal is in motion. And when the last wedding toast fades and the air at the Burrow turns from celebration to siege, the absence of Hermione Granger ceases to be a riddle and becomes a wound. Harry and Ron leave Privet Drive as 2, not 3. This is important. There is no quiet rustle of Hermione's beaded bag, no precise voice reciting contingencies, no invisible lattice of protective theory around their reckless courage. They disapparate with a half-formed plan and a full-grown war closing in, armed with bravery, a stolen locket, and almost nothing else. The failures begin as inconveniences and harden into danger. The tent they secure is a poor, draughty replica of safety, thrown up with clumsy shield charms and half-remembered incantations. Harry knows the word Protego. He does not know the layered ward web Hermione would have woven against detection, against weather, against despair. Not Dumbledore, who had trusted in Harry's heart more than his homework, had ever truly prepared him for the raw logistics of survival. Food runs low because no one thought to research sustainable conjuration. Maps are out of date or missing because no one planned a catalogue of safe Muggle places. Disguises are improvised, crude glamours instead of carefully brewed polyjuice. Under the locket's weight, each small oversight becomes a sharpened edge, cutting into patience, into sleep, into the thin fabric of their remaining hope. Emotionally, the camp is colder than the wind that prowls around their feeble wards. Harry feels not only hunted but abandoned, as if the one person who always stayed to argue, to correct, to stand between him and his worst impulses has chosen, finally, to step aside and watch him fall. The grave was empty. The friendship he thought unbreakable now feels like another hollow memorial. A story he told himself about loyalty and found under pressure to be only a charm that failed. Ron suffers differently. Without Hermione's steady disapproval and reluctant admiration to anchor him, he swings wider, faster. One moment he is fiercely loyal, suggesting reckless raids on known Death Eater homes. The next, he is sullen, gnawing on bread gone stale, muttering that if Hermione had believed in Harry, she would be here. That maybe the Ministry's version of the truth was not entirely a lie. His resentment has no moderating voice to challenge it, only the Horcrux whispering in the cracks. The great set pieces of their hunt warp under this imbalance. The infiltration of the Ministry is not a careful clockwork plan but a rushed incursion, marked by miscast spells, more stunners than subtlety, more blood on polished floors. The escape from the Snatchers is not a clever manipulation of false names and prepared lies, but a frantic sprint through the forest, wands flashing. Branches tearing at cloaks, Ron nearly left behind when he trips, and no one has prearranged signals or routes. Time bleeds away. Each delay is a gift to Voldemort, who feels the Horcruxes tremble but not fall. The Dark Lord is alive to opportunity. Confusion on one side is clarity on the other. One night, by a dying campfire that smokes more than it warms, Harry finally understands the true shape of his solitude. For the first time since he stepped into the wizarding world, he is without Hermione's mind. No silent catalogue of spells at his back, no hand snapping into the air with an answer. Only his own instincts, Ron's fraying loyalty, and a war that will not wait for them to learn. Every mistake might now be fatal. And they both know they are running out of mistakes. Hermione Granger does not disappear. She relocates. She retreats into the very heart of the enemy's architecture and calls it school. When Hogwarts reopens under the Carrow's black banners and Snape's silent reign, she returns through the gates with the other students, another thin figure in regulation robes. The castle is the same stone, the same staircases, the same portraits pretending not to watch. But the magic that saturates it has curdled. Detentions draw blood now. Classrooms smell of fear. The grave of the old Hogwarts is unmarked, yet everyone can feel where it lies. Hermione walks its corridors like a cartographer of a fallen city. She notes patrol patterns, the Carrow's favorite classrooms, which portraits still flinch at cruelty and which look away. By day, she is everything the new regime finds useful: precise, obedient, high-achieving. A Muggle-born who somehow avoids the worst punishments because she never talks back, never hesitates, always shows her work. This is important. It makes her invisible in plain sight. By night, the story changes. In unused classrooms and abandoned bathrooms, she tutors first years whose hands shake too badly to hold their wands. She corrects essays with ink that looks like ordinary annotations, but, when read in sequence, becomes a coded map of safe staircases and doors that will open to the desperate. She adjusts detentions with a quiet charm here, a forged note there, so that the most fragile students are sent to Filch instead of the Carrows. She builds a network the way she once built revision schedules, methodically, relentlessly, with no room for sentiment. A Ravenclaw who can mimic handwriting. A Hufflepuff who has the run of the kitchens. A Slytherin who hates the Carrows more than he fears them. She feeds information outward along these threads toward the side she has chosen to empower, though almost no one at Hogwarts knows which side that truly is. Not Dumbledore, who had once trusted her to follow instructions without question. Not Hagrid, who had always seen only the earnest girl with ink on her hands. The double life hardens her. By day, she raises her hand with answers, corrects her peers, accepts praise from professors who would see her dead if the ministry's lists were updated. By night, she moves children like pieces on a chessboard, calculating who can be risked on a corridor diversion and who must be preserved for later. She writes letters in carefully bland language, every third word a cipher, every seemingly harmless complaint a report on staffing, wards, patrol rotations. Then comes the raid. She hears about it hours before, a whispered conversation outside Snape's office, a timetable shifted by half an hour. She knows which dormitory will be hit, which contraband radios will be found, which names will be dragged from beds. She could warn them. One message, one corridor interception, and half a dozen children might vanish into the hidden routes she has carved into the castle's living stone. She does not. Because if those beds are empty, if those radios are missing, someone will know there is a strategist alive inside their walls. Her access will end. Her plan, the larger one that spans months and lives and probabilities, will collapse. So she waits. She listens to distant footsteps, then distant screams, counting them the way other people count heartbeats. She writes their names down afterward, very neatly, as if order on the page can redeem the chaos she has permitted. The grave was empty, where her old self once lay. The girl who believed every life could be saved has been replaced by someone who decides, in cold blood, who must be sacrificed for a future she can no longer clearly see. Not Sirius, who had once been willing to kill a friend for the greater good, but something adjacent, something quieter. And as the Carrows grow suspicious of the patterns they cannot quite name, as the noose tightens around her invisible network, the question waiting in the dark is simple. When the time comes, whose life will Hermione Granger weigh on the scale next? Hermione does not simply turn away from Harry. She turns towards something else, the ledger she has been keeping in her mind since first year. The quiet, relentless accounting of every time the boy who lived almost died. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, but Hermione has walked other graves with him. Cedric's, Sirius's, Dumbledore's. She has watched the way his hand shakes when he reaches for his wand after a nightmare, the way his magic flares wild and imprecise when someone he loves screams. This is important. Because while others see courage, Hermione sees pattern. She knows his magical weaknesses with the precision of an arithmancy proof. Harry trusts instinct over theory. He will hurl a disarming charm with raw conviction rather than spend 3 seconds recalling the correct countercurse. He underestimates wards and detection spells, treating them as background architecture instead of active weapons. He forgets that a silent alarm can be deadlier than a shouted curse. In a castle saturated with old magic, that is not a quirk. It is a fault line. She has watched him walk straight into layered protections he never bothered to read, from the Devil's Snare to the Ministry's corridors, relying on her explanations to survive. She knew which staircase would move, which classroom door would not open, which library shelf would conceal restricted knowledge he should not touch. If she chooses betrayal, she does not need to guess where he will stumble. She can design it. But her real weapon is not spellcraft. It is confession. The nights he whispered Cedric's name like an apology, the way his voice broke when he spoke of Sirius falling through the veil, of his parents' faces emerging from Voldemort's wand like a grotesque replica of comfort. His guilt over a grave he never saw filled, over a mother and father he believes died because of him. His rage when he discovers he has been lied to, manipulated, used as a symbol. Not Dumbledore, who had calmly measured out the truth in teaspoons. Not Hagrid, who had wrapped him in stories instead of strategies. Hermione has heard the unedited versions. From this, strategy unfolds. She can predict that if a child is taken, Harry will go, no matter the ward line. If injustice is paraded in front of him, Muggle-borns chained, friends on trial, he will step into whatever arena is offered. If the Ministry proclaims him dangerous, he will refuse any bargain that smells like surrender, even if it might save his life. Voldemort or a frightened Ministry could sculpt entire battlefields around that predictability, and Hermione could hand them the blueprints. Then there is the scar. If Lily was a charms prodigy, Hermione is something colder, a logician of souls. Should she deduce, as Dumbledore once did, that a fragment of Voldemort lives inside Harry, the equation changes. The boy she loves becomes, in part, the Horcrux she must destroy. In a war defined by necessary sacrifices, what does a mind like hers do with that truth? On a desk in a quiet room, parchment lies unfurled, covered in tiny neat handwriting, not homework notes, a profile. Harry Potter, reduced to vulnerabilities and triggers, every line a doorway she can open or close. The plan begins there, in ink. The forest was wrong tonight, too quiet, too ordered, as if the trees themselves had been moved according to a plan. Harry and Ron did not notice at first. They were cold, hungry, arguing in low, hoarse whispers about which direction to take, about whether Hermione would have chosen a different path, a better charm, a safer hiding place. This is important. The ambush does not come crashing through the undergrowth with the clumsiness of ordinary snatchers. It settles over them like a net they never see, woven from information only one person alive could have given. The grave was empty. Not in Godric's Hollow this time, but in the small clearing where trust should have been buried deep and safe. Wands appear first, glinting between branches, then voices, rough and confident, calling their names with obscene familiarity. They know the sequence of Harry's defensive spells. They know Ron's injured shoulder will make him slow to turn. They know the tent's exact position in the dark. Someone has drawn a precise map of their fear. Not Dumbledore, who had once orchestrated half a war with secrets and still never knew the pattern of Harry's nightmares as well as she did. Not Hagrid, who had carried him from real ruins and would rather die than deliver him into new ones. Not Sirius, who had raged at betrayal until it became the only language he spoke. The story of this trap belongs to another mind entirely. When the ropes hit, they are wordless, practiced, a choreography of capture. Ron goes down swearing, Harry twisting for a clear shot, the familiar surge of magic roaring up his arm. And then a voice cuts across the chaos, low and steady, speaking his name in a way no Death Eater ever could. Harry, she steps from the shadows as if answering a summons, not issuing one. Hermione is not bound. She is not bruised. Her wand is already raised, held in a grip he knows from 100 library duels and practices, but tonight it is angled at his chest, not the threat beyond it. Her face is composed with terrible care, every muscle pinned in place by will alone. But her eyes are wild around the edges like a charm stretched to breaking. He does not understand. Of course he does not. He demands the simple word first, the oldest question. Why? Her voice shakes, but the argument is precise, the logic merciless. She tells him he is too dangerous to wander the world with a fragment of Voldemort's soul lodged beside his own, guided only by a half-story and a promise of self-sacrifice. She tells him that stumbling through woods, chasing Horcruxes he barely understands, is not a plan. It is a slow execution. She tells him that someone had to choose a different path. This is important. She has negotiated. They will not kill him on sight. He will be taken alive, contained, studied, perhaps used as bait, perhaps as a replica of prophecy fulfilled, something Voldemort can circle warily instead of striking blind. In Hermione's mind, this is the lesser grave, a prison instead of a pyre. The Snatchers bind him, rough rope biting into his wrists, and drag him forward. He does not look at them. He looks only at her. His eyes never leave Hermione's as the distance lengthens, as branches close in, as the last of their shared story burns silently between them. Hermione does not move. Her nails dig crescents into her palms until blood beads bright and unreal. She tastes iron, swallows it like penance, and lets the words escape in a whisper meant for no one and everyone. "I'm saving you," she says, as Harry Potter disappears into the dark. Harry does not see Malfoy Manor first. He hears it. The crack of apparition, the hiss of wards parting, the low, eager murmur of voices that have waited years for this moment and never believed it would truly arrive. He is blindfolded, bound, his magic locked beneath layered restraints that Hermione herself described, calibrated, perfected. This is important. He trusts the hands on his arm until the instant he realizes they are not dragging him away from danger, but delivering him into it. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow. Here, the opposite is true. Every corridor is a grave already dug, every portrait a witness, every inch of polished marble steeped in the sediment of screams. Hermione had known, in the abstract, what Voldemort's reign meant. She had read the records, the testimonies, the careful ministry euphemisms for torture. She had built her plan on that knowledge, on the belief that if Harry was contained, he could be protected from the worst. She had been wrong. They bring him to the drawing room like a trophy, like a prize that has finally been claimed. Bellatrix circles him with the delighted reverence of a collector who has at last acquired the final piece. Lucius watches Hermione the way one studies an unfamiliar charm, wary of hidden runes. Even the other Death Eaters, who had spat her name for years, fall silent at the sight of her standing there, wand holstered, back straight, as if this had always been the story. Not Dumbledore, who had trusted her judgment, not Hagrid, who had called her the cleverest witch of her age, not Sirius, who had joked that she was James and Lily compressed into one relentless mind. None of them are here to see what that mind has done. Bellatrix does not begin with the Cruciatus. That would be too simple. She begins with names, with dates, with the Horcruxes Hermione has mapped in cold ink, testing Harry's ignorance against Hermione's whispered truths. When Harry's answers falter, when confusion clouds his eyes rather than defiance, Bellatrix laughs, high and thin, and presses her wand to his scar. "Let us see what you are hiding, little replica hero," she croons, and the room tightens. Legitimacy driven like a blade, not a probe, but a carving. Hermione watches Harry's body arch, watches his mind be forced open like a grave robbed at midnight. This was never in the plan. She had negotiated limits, spoken of value, of keeping the boy who lived alive and intact. She had believed in a bargain with people who did not believe in bargains. This is important. When Bellatrix's attention flickers toward mutilation, toward marking him as her work, Hermione feels something tear. The carefully drawn lines, the elegant moral proofs, the arguments about greater goods and necessary containment, all dissolve under the simple, obscene fact of Harry's scream. She has a choice, and she knows there will be no second one. Maintain the cover, let the torture continue, preserve her fragile power inside this grave of a house. Or move, turn her wand not on Harry, but on the woman whose laughter is sawing through what is left of her soul. Her fingers tighten on the holly handle. Her mind runs through curses and counter-curses, through exit routes and probabilities, through every charm Lily was a charms prodigy would have chosen in her place. The room seems to hold its breath. Hermione opens her mouth. The sound that comes out is a scream, whether it is the word of a spell as she launches herself at Bellatrix, or the silent, inward shattering of a girl who stays frozen while Harry is dragged away to a cell, is something the manor itself will remember long before anyone else learns the truth. In that scream, the story forks. In one version, the scream is a spell, bright, clean, and furious. Hermione turns on Bellatrix with the precision of a girl who has spent 7 years mastering magic while other children slept. The chandelier shatters, the floor erupts, and for a heartbeat even the Death Eaters are shocked that their careful plan has produced a traitor in their own ranks. This is important, because betrayal, once committed, does not end where you intend. Harry lives because she moves. She buys him seconds with her own body, with curses meant to maim rather than kill, with a desperate, improvisational plan that looks nothing like the meticulous essays she used to write. She is dragged down. She is marked. Perhaps she is left in that cellar in his place, cruciated until her mind fractures. Perhaps she escapes only to deliver herself to the Order in chains, reciting every secret she has already sold. The grave was empty. The girl who walks out is a damaged replica of the prefect who once corrected homework in the common room. From that night forward, she is a pariah ally. Not Dumbledore, who had forgiven far worse in the name of the greater good, is here to sponsor her. Not Hagrid, who had once called her a good witch at heart, can quite meet her eyes. Not Sirius, who had lived Azkaban and still understands treachery in his bones, is willing to trust her with a wand at his back. Yet when the final plan for Hogwarts is drawn, they need her. Her knowledge of the castle's veins, the room of requirement, the pattern of the Carrow's patrols. She returns to the school she once loved as a weapon, fighting beside Harry while knowing that every curse she casts in his defense cannot erase the night she handed him over. In the other version, the scream never leaves her throat. She flinches, she hesitates. She stays still while Harry is dragged away, telling herself that to move would be to die, that a dead Hermione cannot save anyone. Later, she will repeat this as litany: it would have been useless, it would have been foolish, she can do more good alive. The truth is simpler and more terrible. She was afraid. Here, the descent is quieter. She becomes strategist, not shield. Voldemort learns to value a mind that can map Hogwarts as precisely as Lily was a charms prodigy could map sacrificial magic. Hermione designs patrol routes, anticipates resistance, sets traps in corridors where she once hurried to class. At the Battle of Hogwarts, she stands on the wrong side of the broken bridge, pitting everything she knows about Harry's instincts against him. Who else can predict which secret passage he will choose? Who else can calculate which friend he will die to save? In both paths, something fundamental breaks. Hermione's belief that she was the moral axis of the trio does not survive Malfoy Manor. In Redemption, she tries to build a new self from ruins, accepting that forgiveness may never come, yet acting as though it might. In Damnation, she decides the world is a graveyard of illusions, that only she is honest enough to look at the necessary ugliness of war and call it order. Hold both images in your mind. Hermione falling in front of a curse meant for Harry, and Hermione watching him fall because the plan demands it. Feel the vertigo of that thin, bright line between them and ask, as the walls of Hogwarts begin to shake, which version of her walks through the smoke when the doors finally open. When the doors of Hogwarts finally open, canon gives us a battlefield shaped quietly, relentlessly, by Hermione Granger. This is important. To understand the betrayal, you have to understand the absence. In the true story, she is everywhere and nowhere. It is Hermione who remembers the basilisk fangs in the chamber, who understands that cursed replicas of souls demand equally cursed teeth to break them. It is Hermione who reads the castle like a living map, who knows which staircases shift, which portraits warn, which forgotten classroom can become a triage ward. Not Dumbledore, who had walked these halls for a century, but never with her obsessive cartographer's eye. Not Hagrid, who had loved the stones and the grounds, but never charted their weaknesses. Not Sirius, who had roamed as a boy, but never catalogued every secret passage with ink and ruthless precision. Take her out of that web, or worse, set her spinning against it, and the magic of the Battle of Hogwarts unravels thread by thread. The first loss is almost invisible. A corridor above the Great Hall in canon holds because someone thinks to reinforce it, to stack shield charms and structural spells in the right order, to remember that stone behaves differently when saturated with wild magic. Here, no one does. The giants strike, the tremor runs, and the ceiling gives way. Half a dozen students and a pair of auras vanish in the fall. Later, they will say the castle felt more fragile that night, as if the very bones of Hogwarts knew its brightest defender was not truly on its side. Another fracture opens in the dark. In the original timeline, Hermione anticipates a flank along the narrow passage behind the tapestry of Barnabas the Balmy, posts a mixed group of demembers and teachers, turns an ambush into a stalemate. In this version, the tapestry hangs undisturbed. A squad of Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs racing to reinforce the astronomy tower are cut down from behind by Death Eaters who knew exactly where the blind spot would be. Someone should have guessed. No one does. And somewhere deep below, a Horcrux sleeps on, undisturbed. The right book in the restricted section was never opened. The obscure footnote on relics of Ravenclaw never underlined, the pattern never seen. The diadem remains hidden in shadow, its destruction postponed or perhaps denied entirely, because the one witch who would have followed that chain of references to its grave conclusion has stepped away from the shelf. If she stands openly with Voldemort, the damage is colder, more deliberate. Death Eaters skirt the trick stare that always seizes the unwary. They do not blunder into the suits of armor Hermione once enchanted to attack intruders. They apparate with surgical precision to the weak points in the wards around the greenhouses and the boathouse. They strike the hospital wing first, knowing Pomfrey's routines. They target the bridge that will not bear fiendfire but will shatter under synchronized blasting curses. Only someone who had revised Hogwarts like an examination would know exactly where to cut. If she moves in the grey instead, the night becomes a ledger of agonies. A curse, meant for a first year, is redirected into the stone, but the witch who cast it is allowed to fall, because her face is too familiar and her recognition would be fatal. A Death Eater plan to flood the Great Hall with poison gas is quietly sabotaged, but too late to save the scouts who first open the door. Hermione walks the corridors as a ghost while still alive, erasing footprints here, leaving others untouched there, trying to balance a plan that no longer has room for clean victories. And in the middle of it, Harry bleeds. He stumbles across the rubble-strewn courtyard, lungs burning, wand hand shaking, eyes stinging with smoke and the metallic sting of spellfire. When he looks up, through the drifting ash and the falling sparks, he sees her on the far side of the chaos. Not a friend at his shoulder, but a strategist somewhere behind the lines, pulling threads he can no longer see. In that moment he understands that the war is no longer simply between his wand and Voldemort's. It is a war against Hermione's mind, turned with terrifying precision against everything they once swore to protect together. And there is no shield charm for that. The grave was empty. The space where trust had lived is now a weapon aimed back at him. And the night is not yet over. The forest is waiting. Silent, patient, it has seen children wander under its branches and monsters crawl between its roots. But it has never seen this, a boy walking willingly toward his own grave, and a girl who might decide whether he ever reaches it. In canon, Harry walks alone. He leaves the tent, leaves Hermione and Ron sleeping, and the story insists on his solitude as he moves through the trees like a condemned man who has finally understood the sentence. He knows the Horcrux inside him must die. He believes that means he must die. Hermione does not know, because if she knew, she would have thrown herself between him and the darkness, would have argued, calculated, begged until the path closed and the war twisted into some other shape. This is important, because in this betrayal world, ignorance is not her shield. Knowledge is. Here, Hermione discovers the truth first. Perhaps it is in Snape's memories, viewed not by Harry in the headmaster's office, but by Hermione, who arrived there seconds earlier, wand drawn, mind already assembling patterns from 1,000 scattered pieces. Perhaps it is in a forbidden text she stole from Dumbledore's private shelf, a brittle page that describes the precise magical logic of tethered souls and living Horcruxes. However the revelation comes, the conclusion is the same. Harry is both boy and bomb. To end Voldemort, the bomb must detonate. She knew, long before this night, that magic had prices. She rewrote her parents' lives with a charm and walked away. She trapped Rita Skeeter in a jar and called it justice. But this is different. This is not a stranger's memory or an enemy's freedom. This is Harry's heartbeat, Harry's breath in the cold air, Harry's life balanced against every other life still clinging to hope. Two paths open, as stark as the trees around her. She can stop him. She can lock him in a warded tent, bind him with conjured chains, stun him again and again, preserving the one life she cannot bear to lose while the world outside burns. Or she can step aside. She can clear the way, silence the alarms, guide him even, with a whispered charm that parts the undergrowth so that the boy she once dragged out of danger walks unhindered into the killing curse. What does that choice look like from the inside? Is it murder if she lets him go, knowing precisely what Voldemort will do? Is it sacrifice if she believes, with the cold clarity of numbers, that one death to end all others is the only rational plan left? Not Dumbledore, who had always spoken of the greater good as if he alone could carry its weight. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from another ruined house and would never have allowed this one. Not Sirius, who had once offered escape on a hippogriff's back. None of them are here. Only Hermione, the forest, and the approaching end. She presses herself against a tree, bark biting into her palms, eyes shut as if darkness within might spare her from the darkness without. Voldemort's voice drifts through the branches, high and cold, a summons and a promise. There is a flash she does not see. Then, a silence so complete it feels like the world has stopped breathing. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow. Now another grave has been dug in the air between two wands, and she has allowed it to be filled. Hermione knows that whatever she does next, she has crossed a line she can never uncross. And somewhere, deeper in the forest, something else is stirring that she has not planned for at all. The forest holds its breath. The castle does not. By the time Harry steps back into the Great Hall, the war has already begun to settle into a terrible stillness. Bodies lie in ordered rows beneath hastily conjured sheets, each one a quiet accusation. Smoke clings to the rafters. Dust hangs in the air like ash that has forgotten how to fall. The survivors huddle in broken clusters, whispering names as if speaking them might keep them alive. He is alive. Against every prophecy, against every plan, the boy who walked into the forest to die has walked back out again. This is important, because the moment he crosses the threshold, the story everyone thinks they know about loyalty and sacrifice begins to fracture. He does not look for Ron. He does not look for Ginny. He looks for her. Hermione stands near the far wall, beside a toppled house table, her wand still in her hand, as if she cannot quite remember how to put it away. There is blood on her sleeve that is not hers. There is a tremor in her fingers that will not stop. She knew he might die. She did not plan for him to stand in front of her like this, eyes too clear, carrying the grave of what she has done in the set of his jaw. He does not embrace her, he convenes her. The conversation that follows is not a reunion, it is a trial held in whispers amid the dead. Harry names the charges the way others name the fallen. The reports to the ministry when she decided he was too dangerous to be left unsupervised. The secret meetings with McGonagall and Kingsley, with Wardmakers and Unspeakables, where contingency plans were drafted that did not include his consent. The night she walked him, bound and stunned, into the hands of Death Eaters because the trap required a convincing replica of surrender and she had decided he would survive it. When did you stop believing in me, Hermione? The question is soft. It lands harder than any curse. Her defense is not quick. It comes in fragments, pulled from sleepless nights and corridors where she watched him stagger away from the hospital wing again and again. She speaks of adults who treated him as a weapon or a prophecy or a symbol, but never as a boy whose grave had been prepared since infancy. Not Dumbledore, who had charted his childhood like a chessboard. Not Hagrid, who had placed him on that board with the gentlest hands he had. Not Sirius, who had loved him but would have followed him into any fire. So she chose a different fire. She tells him she betrayed his choices to save his life, and the lives that would have been crushed beneath the ruins of his martyrdom. She insists that the world could not survive a plan that required its savior to be so willing to die that he forgot how to live. Harry listens. The dust settles. Somewhere a child sobs. He cannot forgive the deaths that followed her calculations, the ambushes her information enabled, the friends who fell in battles arranged around her careful logic. She cannot regret the logic itself, even as tears carve clean tracks through the grime on her face. Lily was a charms prodigy, and Hermione has always worshipped the kind of magic that turns intention into unbreakable protection. She has merely tried to build her own version out of strategy and sacrifice. They reach an impasse that no spell can bridge. In the silence that follows, possibilities open like doors in a shifting corridor. Perhaps they will become wary allies, bound by a war they won, but unable to look at each other without seeing the cost. Perhaps they will be permanent enemies, each convinced the other has murdered the truth. Or perhaps, most quietly and most cruelly, they will become strangers who pass in Hogwarts corridors rebuilt from rubble, each carrying a private story in which they were the one who tried to do what was right. The war is over. The reckoning is not. And somewhere beyond the shattered windows, in the wider world that must now be rebuilt, forces are already deciding which version of this betrayal will be remembered as history, and which will be buried like an empty grave. The war is over. The reckoning is not. But in one version of this story, that reckoning arrives in a single irreversible moment. Harry falls and does not rise. He dies with one Horcrux still hidden, or with all of them destroyed but his body broken beyond the reach of magic, his scar finally quiet, because there is nothing left inside him to burn. This is important. The plan that was meant to save more lives miscalculates by a single step, a single assumption, and the boy the world needed as symbol becomes simply what he always was. Mortal Hermione survives. That is her punishment. Years later, she moves through the polished corridors of the rebuilt ministry with a precision that borders on ritual. She drafts legislation that forbids underage combat deployments, writes protocols for Hogwarts evacuations, designs charms that will trigger if any headmaster attempts to arm children for war again. She argues for curriculum reforms, for compulsory trauma healing, for oversight committees that can never again be brushed aside with a twinkle and a lemon drop. On parchment, the world is becoming rational, ordered, almost humane. But the foundation of this new order is a grave no one visits. There is a statue of Harry in the ministry atrium. Of course there is. Wand raised, face lifted, cloak carved to look as though it is forever in motion. The plaque speaks of courage, of sacrifice, of the boy who lived, who became the man who fell so that others might stand. It does not mention the argument the night before the final battle, the way Hermione's voice shook as she insisted that they had to move now, that waiting for one more Horcrux meant risking thousands. It does not mention that she was the one who calculated the odds and decided that Harry's life could be spent. Not Dumbledore, who had once set pieces on a board and then died before paying the full price. Not Hagrid, who had carried Harry's body and wept into his hair. Not Sirius, who had shouted at portraits and ghosts, demanding someone to blame. None of them know the numbers Hermione wrote in the margins of her notes, the column where she placed Harry's name. She tells herself the world is safer, that fewer children will die now, that Harry's death was not in vain, because the laws she passes, the system she builds, will prevent another generation from being turned into soldiers. Yet every time she walks past that statue, every time she sees the word hero engraved in brass, she feels the missing lines of the story like a physical ache. The grave was empty, but the cost was real. Some colleagues revere her as the mind that helped end the war, the witch whose strategies finally cornered Voldemort. Others watch her with a quiet, enduring suspicion, sensing a hardness in her that no victory should require. Few know how close she stood to the Dark Lord's plans, how thoroughly she understood both sides of the board. She lives in a constant state of partial exposure. Always one testimony, one recovered memory, one opened pensieve away from being seen as something other than savior or traitor. And on certain evenings, when the ministry is silent and the world she has ordered into place hums along without her, Hermione leaves the statues and the plaques behind. She walks to a quiet, unmarked stretch of ground outside the ruined forest where the final battle burned itself out. There is no monument here, no replica, only earth and the faint residue of old spells. She stands where she thinks he fell. She does not use magic to be sure. Her apologies are almost soundless. She is not certain whether she is mourning Harry, or the version of herself who would have chosen differently, or the world that might have existed if she had allowed one more risk instead of one more safeguard. She only knows that in this ordered, safer future, the one person who should have been most alive is the one who cannot answer her. And somewhere beyond that unmarked spot, history is already hardening around the lie that everyone can live with, and the truth that Hermione Granger cannot outrun. The grave was empty in another way now, not just of Hermione's body, which was still very much alive, but of the quiet structure she had imposed on Harry's chaos, the invisible scaffolding of rules and references and relentless conscience that had held the story together. When she steps away or turns away, there is not only betrayal, there is vacuum. Something rushes in to fill it. This is important. Nature abhors a void, and so does a war. Around Harry, other minds begin to lean closer to the fire. Luna, with her drifting gaze and unblinking acceptance of the impossible. Ginny, with a temper like a hex and a history that still remembers the cold silk of a diary against her skin. Neville, whose hands shake until they do not, whose loyalty hardens like stone. Even Fred and George, whose jokes have always concealed a startling precision, a knack for pattern and pressure points that any general would envy. None of them are a replica of Hermione. That is the first and most stubborn truth. Hermione had been breadth and depth together, lawbook and battlefield medic, the one who could quote Hogwarts, a history, and then set it on fire if the rules became a weapon. Without her, the magic around Harry becomes wilder, less annotated, more prone to fracture. Luna steps closest to the empty place. She does not argue with Harry about facts because facts, to her, are only one thin layer of reality. She asks instead what the castle remembers, what the portraits heard, what the things no one believes might still be whispering in the walls. Her influence pulls Harry sideways, away from binary choices, away from Dumbledore's carefully drawn lines. Plans become visions, more intuitive than researched, guided by symbols and patterns that only sometimes correspond to the Ministry's categories of spell and counterspell. It works until it doesn't. How many near misses does it take before Harry realizes that Hermione's grounded logic had been a kind of shield? Ginny fills another part of the absence. She, more than anyone, knows what it is to feel Voldemort inside her thoughts, to doubt the integrity of her own mind. When Hermione is gone, it is Ginny who can sit with Harry in the dark and name the possession for what it is. But empathy, in her, is braided with fury. Her advice trends toward confrontation, toward meeting the grave danger head-on, wand raised, rather than toward strategic patience. The Chamber of Secrets taught her that waiting for rescue is another kind of death. Neville's growth accelerates in the shadow of that loss. Without Hermione to organize, to draft the plan, someone at Hogwarts must decide when to say no. Neville's leadership is not brilliant in the way Lily was a charms prodigy, not intricate and layered. It is stubborn, rooted in soil and memory, in the simple refusal to bow. The resistance he builds is braver than cannon, louder but less tactically sophisticated. More names end up carved into stone because nobody knew the obscure charm that would have turned a slaughter into a stalemate. Fred and George, half-joking tacticians, edge from mischief to strategy. Their inventions become less about spectacle and more about survival. But without Hermione's moral rigor, the line between necessary sabotage and cruelty blurs. Victories still come. Yet each is messier, each loss heavier, because the mind that once braided intellect and conscience together is missing. And somewhere, as the war tilts toward its final reckoning, another, older strategist is already calculating how to use that gap. Another strategist is calculating. An older one. A man who has already lost too many children to both sides of the same war. Albus Dumbledore, in this darker story, is not merely the benevolent headmaster with twinkling eyes and lemon drops. He is an old general, and Hermione Granger is a student he should have seen slipping long before she crossed the line. This is important. Because if anyone in that castle understood what relentless overwork, perfectionism, and disillusionment could do to a brilliant mind, it was the man who had once watched his own sister break under the weight of other people's expectations. Not Dumbledore, who had read Hermione's essays, watched her timetable buckle under impossible loads, and seen her rage at the Ministry's decrees. Not Dumbledore, who had listened when she spoke about house elves and injustice and rules that protected the powerful. He of all people should have recognized that the same drive that made her brew polyjuice in a bathroom and research Horcruxes in a tent could, if untended, turn her toward colder arithmetic, which lives to save, which to sacrifice, which truths to burn. Instead, he withholds. The prophecy remains a half-told riddle. The Horcruxes a shadowy mission delegated to children, Snape's allegiance a secret hoarded like a final, dangerous charm. Each omission is meant as protection, as if ignorance were a shield. But to Hermione, the pattern is different. Each gap in the story is a fracture in the narrative of the light, a sign that the adults who claim the moral high ground are content to lie when it suits the plan. She watches him disappear from Hogwarts in 5th year, watches Umbridge rise, watches the Order move pieces on a board she is never allowed to see. How long before she asks the forbidden question, if they are willing to manipulate Harry, what else are they willing to do? When the truth finally comes about the Hallows, about Harry's role as a living weapon, the grave is empty where her trust once lay. Imagine an alternate turn. Dumbledore, feeling her drift, invites her into the true inner circle. He explains the prophecy in full, lays the Horcrux map on the table, names Snape for what he is and was. Would transparency anchor her or horrify her? Would she see a necessary ugliness in service of survival, or an old man repeating the very ideology he once called the greater good, only with softer language and younger casualties? Here lies the final irony. Dumbledore, who abandoned Grindelwald's rhetoric after it led to a grave in Godric's Hollow and a sister on the floor, fails to see that Hermione is walking the same path in miniature, sacrificing individuals for abstractions, convinced that if she just thinks hard enough, suffers long enough, the numbers will come out clean. In the headmaster's office, long after his body is gone, his portrait sits above the empty perch of Fawkes. Eyes closed, perhaps sleeping, perhaps refusing to wake to the possibility that, in shielding Harry with silence, he drove away the one mind that might have kept the boy alive without ever betraying him at all. Snape notices before the portraits do. Before Dumbledore's painted eyelids twitch. Before anyone understands that Hermione Granger has stepped off the path and into the graveyard where his own youth is buried. He recognizes the pattern because he has lived it. This is important. A brilliant mind, flayed raw by hypocrisy, a child who studies the rules until she understands that the rules themselves are a weapon. Hermione, who once believed in house points and exam scores, begins to see what Snape saw in dusty staff meetings and order councils. The institution will praise your courage, then send you to die. In another story, they would have been enemies only. Here, their similarities become a dark mirror. Both half-outsiders in their own world. Both defined by the way they stand at the edge of a house that never truly claimed them, he in Slytherin despising Gryffindor noise, she in Gryffindor increasingly appalled by its reckless worship of glory. Both willing, when cornered, to do something monstrous and call it necessary. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, in Hermione. The grave is where her simpler faith in fairness is slowly being lowered, handful by careful handful. Snape does not recruit her, he tests her. A question about the Ministry's decrees. A remark about Dumbledore's omissions. Not Dumbledore, who had once promised Harry protection and then allowed a boy to face a basilisk. not Hagrid, who had led children into the Forbidden Forest and called it a lesson. Hermione's answers sharpen. She stops defending the adults. She begins, very quietly, to defend the plan. So he teaches her what no syllabus contains: occlumency, not as a set of incantations, but as the art of partitioning the soul, of building replicas of memory that can be sacrificed while the real truth hides beneath. The discipline of double agency, where every kindness can be a cover and every silence a shield. The cold arithmetic of living with blood on one's hands and still rising the next morning to mark essays. He shows her how to lie to Voldemort's followers without flinching, and how to lie to Harry without breaking. How to design a charm that misdirects a curse by a single inch. How to stand in a corridor while children pass and know that one misstep in her calculations will put their names on a memorial wall. Yet there is tension in every lesson. His contempt for Gryffindor idealism grates against the stubborn ember in her that still believes in justice, if not in mercy. She will betray Harry to save him from a worse fate. Snape once betrayed the Potters and has been living in that echo ever since. When he watches her align, however temporarily, with the very forces she fears, does he feel guilt that he has built another version of himself? Or does he see with a terrible relief that he is no longer alone in this moral purgatory of necessary sins? One night, long after curfew, they sit in a deserted classroom. No candles, only the faint phosphorescent shimmer of protective magic layered over stone. A chessboard between them, pieces unmoving, game abandoned. They speak in low voices of prophecies and probabilities, of how many lives a single delayed warning might cost, of how far Hermione can go before Harry will never forgive her. They both understand they are moving people as if they were pieces on that board. They both know they are already too far gone to step away. And still, in different warped ways, they are planning to save the same boy. A boy they keep hurting because they believe the alternative is his grave. Beyond the door, the castle sleeps. Inside, teacher and student refine a betrayal that is meant impossibly to keep him alive. Beyond that door, while the castle sleeps, another mind is already awake, already calculating, already being weighed by the one man who believes he alone understands the mathematics of fear and power. Voldemort has never believed in love. He believes in leverage, in blood, in magic, in the clean arithmetic of terror. A Muggle-born schoolgirl should have been beneath his notice, a footnote in a war written in ancient families and older grudges. Yet Hermione Granger refuses to remain a footnote. This is important, because each time his followers report another narrow escape, another ruined plan, another moment when Harry Potter survives by intellect rather than luck, the same name appears in the story, hers. He sneers at her blood. Of course he does. The contempt is instinctive, old, rehearsed, but contempt is not blindness. He hears of Devil's Snare burned away by clear thinking, of Polyjuice brewed in a bathroom, of a time-turner used to rewrite a single night without collapsing the world. He hears of a girl who reads the rules of magic not as commandments, but as invitations to think more sharply. In the grave silence of his own mind, he marks her as useful. And then he acquires her, not in a single moment, not with a single curse, with pressure, with chaos, with a ministry that lies, with a headmaster who withholds, with a boy who keeps choosing reckless hope over coherent plan. When she comes to him, It is not on her knees, it is with a list. Names, wards, habits, weaknesses, she offers order in the place of what she calls Harry's ruinous improvisation. He is amused. At first, he tests her with cruelty, orders that cut across everything she once claimed to be. Interrogate this captive. Design a charm that breaks a Patronus. Draft a more efficient rota for the Dementors. Each time he believes he has pushed her past the point of return. Each time she obeys in form and betrays in detail, twisting the order so that one prisoner survives, one mind is spared, one grave remains empty where a body was meant to fall. The grave was empty, and he knew with a cold clinical irritation that it is because she had seen a loophole he did not specify. It infuriates him, it fascinates him. In the long, echoing hours at his makeshift Hogwarts throne, he studies her the way he once studied his own reflection in the orphanage window. A brilliant child, isolated by intellect, convinced the world is irrational and must be remade according to a superior design. Not Dumbledore, who had cloaked madness in whimsy. Not Hagrid, who had wrapped loyalty in clumsiness. Not Sirius, who had confused rebellion with purpose. Hermione is something closer to himself, but colder, because her sacrifices are calculated rather than born of desperation. One night he asks the question directly, "Why did you betray him?" She meets his eyes, does not flinch. "Because he embraced chaos. You, at least, have a plan. I feared chaos more than I feared you." The answer lands like a spell with no incantation. It flatters him, because it acknowledges his order. It wounds him, because it withholds worship. She has not chosen him as a lord, she has chosen him as a lesser catastrophe. This is important, because in that moment he understands that Harry's power was never only love. It was being the axis around which others chose to suffer. Hermione can choose the same suffering, but strip it of warmth, turn it into pure surgical sacrifice. The only thing more dangerous than a boy who will die for his friends is a girl who will damn herself for the world's stability. He realizes he may never truly control her, only aim her. And somewhere in the castle's dark, shifting corridors, something or someone has already begun to turn her aim away from him. Ron Weasley stands in that corridor between them, between the boy who lived under a legend and the girl who built the logic that kept him alive. This is important. He has always been in the middle without quite realizing it. The sixth son in a house where hand-me-downs carry the weight of years, the friend who walks beside the chosen one, the boy who copies homework from the brightest witch of her age. In canon, those insecurities simmer, second best at Quidditch, second loudest in a fight, second sharpest in a crisis. In this darker story, they are not background noise, they are leverage. Not Dumbledore, who had praised his loyalty, ever truly understood how often Ron heard the unspoken comparison. Not as brave as Harry, not as clever as Hermione. Not Hagrid, who had clapped his shoulder and called him a good friend, felt the small, sour twist in Ron's chest when professors looked past him to Harry's scar or Hermione's hand in the air. The grave was empty where his confidence should have been, and betrayal pours easily into that hollow. When Hermione's first betrayals are small, Ron does what he has always done. He mediates. He shrugs, jokes less than usual, tries to translate Hermione's fear of uncontrolled magic into something Harry can hear, and Harry's anger into something Hermione can bear. He remembers third year, the firebolt locked away for his own good, and thinks she is frightened, that is all. At first, he believes there must be a plan. But neutrality is a charm that fails under sustained pressure. As the stakes rise, information leaked, protections broken, people hurt, Ron discovers that standing in the middle means becoming a target. His mother asks which friend is right. Ginny watches his face when Harry's name is in the prophet. The Order begins to whisper, he must choose. In one thread of this replica timeline, he chooses Harry. Anger burns away hesitation. Hermione is a traitor. The word tastes like ash, but he speaks it. He cuts her off in the common room, in the corridor, in his own mind. When she tries to explain, he refuses to listen. Later, when the truth emerges that some of her collaboration diverted attacks, that a single warning she slipped through saved a Weasley nephew he has not yet met, the guilt is a living thing. He has misjudged the girl who once set a flock of canaries on him and then cried when he bled. In another, he hesitates the other way. Harry is reckless, haunted, half alive with prophecy and grief. Hermione sounds measured, reasonable, like fifth year before the Department of Mysteries. Ron, exhausted by crisis, believes her. Briefly, disastrously, he stands at her side, convinced Harry has finally gone too far. When he learns the extent of her collaboration, when he sees the bodies in a corridor that her information helped create, shame settles on him like a permanent cloak. Not Sirius, who had once fallen through a veil, ever felt more responsible for a fall. Years later, the war is over, but the fracture remains. Ron sits in a quiet burrow kitchen that has been repaired more times than he can count, telling his children stories. Uncle Harry on a broom, laughing in the rain. Aunt Hermione in the library, wand light glinting off dust motes. There are long pauses between some names. Entire years are edited out, smoothed into vague phrases about hard times and people making terrible choices for reasons they thought were right. His children ask, once, why Aunt Hermione does not visit on Christmas. Ron looks at the clock with the hands that still say mortal peril too often, and cannot quite form the truth. How do you explain that love and loyalty can fracture so completely that even magic cannot mend the break? He changes the subject. He tells them instead about a chessboard in first year, and a boy who was, for one brief moment, not second to anyone. Ron does not tell them that Hermione has become something worse than absent. She has become a question. A living argument about what justice means when the world is ending. Because Hermione Granger's betrayal does not emerge from nowhere. It grows from the same soil that once made her the safest mind in the room. She began as a girl who believed that if you followed the rules, the world would make sense, that every problem had an answer written in a book, codified in a statute, preserved like a charm in the pages of Hogwarts history. This is important. The first time she breaks a rule for Harry and Ron, she does it trembling, as if the fabric of reality itself might protest. By third year, she is reporting a firebolt because safety regulations matter more than Harry's joy. By fifth, she is blackmailing Rita Skeeter and founding SPEW, convinced that the law is failing so profoundly that she must become her own legislature. The grave was empty, where her faith in institutions should have been. Fudge's denial, Umbridge's sadism, the quiet, bureaucratic evil of the Muggle-born Registration Commission, each one teaches her that the Ministry can twist law and truth until they are unrecognizable. And yet, paradoxically, that very corruption becomes the lure. a rule-conscious witch looks at the chaos and thinks, if someone like me were inside the machine, if I had access to the files, the archives, the levers, I could repair this. The ministry does not seduce her with power alone. It offers her a replica of her oldest comfort, an ordered world, if only she will help rewrite the order. Not Dumbledore, who had once spoken of the greater good with a boy named Grindelwald, recognizes the echo quickly enough. Not Hagrid, who had always trusted hearts over laws, can follow the intricate, terrible logic. Hermione begins to sound like wizarding history itself, brilliant minds justifying necessary harm with beautiful abstractions. When she signs confidential decrees that constrain Harry's movements, when she hands over memories for evidentiary review, she tells herself that temporary violations will avert permanent catastrophe. Dumbledore's youthful letters to Grindelwald spoke of a new world where Muggles would be guided for their own safety. Hermione's reports speak of a chosen one who must be contained for everyone else's. Is she a villain? Or does she merely reveal how thin the line is between traitor and savior, a line often inked only after the war, depending on who writes the history and which bodies lie in which grave? If Voldemort falls because she crippled Harry's freedom at a crucial moment, is she condemned or commemorated? If Harry dies because of her, but thousands live, which name is carved in stone and which is whispered in shame? The story refuses an easy answer. Instead, it turns its gaze outward toward the listener. If you knew your closest friend might become a catastrophic weapon through prophecy or possession or simple volatile grief, what would you permit yourself in the name of stopping them? How certain would you be that you were right? And when the magic settled and the dead were counted, would that certainty survive? The grave of trust, once broken, is rarely refilled. This is important because Harry James Potter's life is in many ways a long experiment in how much one boy can forgive and still remain alive inside his own skin. He forgave Ron for walking away in a tent lit by a dying fire, for choosing hunger and Horcruxes over friendship and then choosing escape. He forgave Dumbledore for a childhood shaped by omissions, for a prophecy withheld, for being raised like a living weapon under a charm of secrecy instead of protection. He even forgave Snape in the end, when the pensieve laid bare a story of obsession, cruelty, and reluctant courage that did not erase the harm but reframed the man. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated his suffering. Not Hagrid, who had brought him to the Dursleys. Not Sirius, who had abandoned him to Azkaban's shadow by his own reckless choices. None of them were cast out forever. So where does Hermione's betrayal sit in that graveyard of almost unforgivable acts? Is it another painful stone among many, or something qualitatively different, a fracture in the very magic that bound the trio together? Motive matters. Betrayal for self-interest is one kind of wound, betrayal in the name of protection is another, stranger cut. If Hermione stands beside the Ministry or even Voldemort because she wants power, safety, recognition, Harry can understand the sin even as he condemns it. Desire is a familiar enemy, but if she turns him in, dismantles his plans, hands over his secrets while genuinely believing she is saving lives, saving him from himself, the harm becomes harder to name and therefore harder to heal. How do you forgive someone who broke you as an act of love? After the war, the scenarios unfold like grim replicas of justice. In one, Hermione is sent to Azkaban, a thin figure behind enchanted bars while the sea pounds the rock and Harry is asked to testify. In another, she walks the world on probation, wand monitored, name whispered like a curse in Diagon Alley, and the Wizengamot looks to him when they debate leniency. In a third, she chooses exile, disappearing into foreign streets where British magic is only a story, and the Ministry quietly inquires whether the chosen one believes she should ever be allowed to return. Does he argue for mercy, oppose it, or step back and say, "I will not be your moral charm, judge her without me"? Perhaps the closest thing to redemption is conditional. They work together on reforms, on laws that might prevent the next child from being turned into a symbol or a weapon. They share offices, not secrets. There is respect, even a kind of wary affection, but the easy intimacy of Hogwarts corridors is gone. The grave was empty where that younger trust once lay. And yet there remains one final, darker possibility, that the boy who spared Peter Pettigrew, who chose not to kill when every plan said he should, might look at Hermione Granger, remember the moment the world collapsed because she believed she was right, and say, "Know this, I cannot forgive." The story does not tell us which future becomes alive. Not yet. The next choice will decide it. Forgiveness is a choice. So is condemnation. Between them stands Hermione Granger, and in this fractured timeline she refuses to fit easily into either grave we dig for her. She is not a neat moral lesson. She is an ongoing argument. There is first Hermione the villain. Not cackling, not cruel for pleasure, but tragic, a mind whose precision has outrun its compassion. This is the Hermione who turns Harry in because she believes the greater danger is his recklessness, who feeds reports to the Ministry because law feels safer than prophecy, who collaborates with Snape in cold, deliberate secrecy. The grave was empty where their friendship once lay, she buried it herself. In this reading, every charm she casts to monitor Harry, every plan she perfects with the enemy is another step into a darkness she can justify but no longer truly feels. But the same girl can be seen from another angle. Hermione the hero, misunderstood, necessary, brutal in her mercy. This is important. In that version, she hands Harry to the Aurors because she has seen what happens when one boy is allowed to carry the weight of a war unchecked. She gives Snape information because she believes he alone can steer events away from mass slaughter. She surrenders secrets to the Ministry not out of faith, but to force public scrutiny on a conflict Dumbledore would rather keep in the shadows. The acts are the same. The intention is different. Is she monstrous, or is she the only one willing to pay the price of being hated so that others might live? And then there is the third figure, the most unsettling, Hermione the human. She is neither architect of evil nor silent martyr, but a girl who stumbles between both images, never fully becoming either. She believes, doubts, revises, breaks, not Dumbledore, who had decades to grow into his compromises. Not Hagrid, who had the comfort of simple loyalties. Not Sirius, who had rage to burn away uncertainty. Hermione has only her mind and her fear, and sometimes they do not agree. The same betrayal can be read as cruelty or care, depending on which consequences we choose to emphasize. Harry in a cell is a horror if we fix on his loneliness. Harry alive, spared a suicidal confrontation with Voldemort, looks different if we fix on the bodies that do not fall. One story, two truths, both alive at once. fandom has long sanctified Hermione as the infallible smart one, the girl who knows the answer, who saves the day, who is right because the book says she is right. Yet canon already held a sharper edge. She imprisoned Rita Skeeter in a jar. She altered her parents' memories without their consent. She could be ruthless when certain. Imagining her as capable of deep harm does not invent a new Hermione, it forces us to look directly at the one who is already there. The most compelling version of this alternate history does not tidy her away with redemption or damnation. She remains morally ambiguous, walking a corridor of half-light, forever re-evaluating her choices, never fully sure whether she saved Harry from a worse fate or betrayed the only person who ever trusted her without conditions. She wins the war, perhaps, or she helps end it, and lies awake years later wondering which description is the more honest. Because the power of this what-if does not lie in pointing at Hermione and saying, "Here is the villain we feared," or "the hero we prefer." It lies in recognizing how thin the line truly is. Given her mind, her terror of chaos, her bone-deep need for order, how many of us, placed before the same branching paths, would have walked differently? The story's most unsettling charm is this: the more closely we examine her betrayal, the more clearly we see ourselves. And somewhere beyond Hermione's calculations and Harry's wounds, another figure is watching, measuring the fracture between intention and outcome, deciding how far he is willing to let it run before he intervenes. He watches, and the fracture widens. It widens first in the places the story once felt safest. Under the trapdoor, there is no firm voice reminding them that relaxing is the way out of Devil's snare. Ron thrashes. Harry struggles. By the time they remember that fire is their ally, it has already crushed ribs and bruised lungs. They live, but barely, and Harry learns something Hermione would have given him for free: that panic is as deadly as any curse. In the second year, there is no Polyjuice plan meticulously brewed in a haunted bathroom. No illegal potion that turns children into replicas of Slytherin boys. The heir of Slytherin moves unobserved. The diary remains a whispering secret for longer. More students fall. Colin does not wake before Easter. This is important. Without Hermione's half-petrified clue clutched in her hand, the word basilisk comes late, and Ginny's rescue becomes a desperate improvisation, not a half-guided descent. Third year, no time Turner rescue. Buckbeak dies. Sirius is kissed on the shore of the lake while the Dementors swarm, and Harry's stag, Patronus, flickers, valiant and insufficient. Not Dumbledore, who had once smiled at the elegance of a temporal loop, can rewrite that moment. The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, but here the grave is full. And it is Harry who walks away with a different kind of orphanhood, knowing that his godfather died, believing him already lost. In the Tri-Wizard year, clues fall apart. No Hermione to force him through spellbooks, to drag him to the library, to translate Golden Egg screams into Mer song. Harry leans on Cedric instead, and the alliance between houses strengthens even as danger grows. Fleur, Victor, Cedric, and Harry build a fragile, shared strategy. It is slower, messier, but it teaches Harry to trust his own instincts and the judgment of his peers. One of the few improvements in this darker line of magic is that he does not stand quite so alone. Without Hermione, there is no methodical birth of Dumbledore's army. The Dar forms later, more like a scattered underground than a classroom. Not Hagrid, who had always believed in Harry's heart, can give them structure. Others step forward, Neville. Pushed earlier into leadership, Luna. Turning belief into discipline, Ginny. Weaponizing her anger. They learn, but they bleed for every lesson. At the Department of Mysteries, there is no cool logic to conjure bluebell flames or seal doors. The chase is wilder, the traps more effective. One more member of the original group does not return. In 6th year, the Half-Blood Prince's margins go unchecked. No Hermione to question the charm-laced handwriting, to insist that power without provenance is a grave temptation. Sectum Sempra is learned earlier, used more recklessly, and leaves scars that cannot be fully healed. Horcrux research in Deathly Hallows slows to a crawl. Ron and Harry stumble through forests with half-remembered theories rather than a curated list. The locket stays on longer, the whispers cut deeper. When Malfoy Manor comes, there is no ruthless logic to carve mudblood into Hermione's arm because she is not there. Instead, another hostage screams, and it is that voice that haunts Harry's sleep. At the final duel, Hermione's divided loyalty becomes a silent axis. She has mapped Harry's habits, his tells, the way his wand hand shifts when he doubts. Voldemort's curses meet a boy forced into a duelist, not a guided weapon. He wins, but not cleanly, and the list of the dead is longer. Individually, none of these turns breaks the war. Together, they lengthen it, darken it, strip it of almost every easy victory. Survivors crawl out the other side more compromised, more uncertain of the truth of what they have done to stay alive. So pause on your favorite canon scene. The library table, the tent in the woods, the shattered courtyard at dawn. Now, remove Hermione from Harry's side in that instant, or place her quietly across the field. Who still walks away? And whose grave, in this version of the story, is no longer empty? In that empty space beside Harry, the missing hand on his shoulder, the quiet voice no longer saying, "Are you sure?" Another question rises like smoke. Whose idea of the greater good is she serving now? The grave was empty in Godric's Hollow, but there is another grave that matters here. The buried summer in Godric's Hollow when two prodigies, Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald, stood over their own bright future and decided that Muggles would be safer under a wand. Their plan was elegant, terrible, almost kind. Wizards would rule for the greater good, restraining the dangerous with benevolent force, building a world where no Ariana would ever be hurt again. This is important. The seduction was not cruelty. It was control in the name of love. Hermione would have read that story in books Dumbledore never meant her to find. She would have known the language. Necessary sacrifice. Managed risk. The few for the many. When she weighs Harry's life, or his freedom, or his trust, against a prophecy, against a war, against a world on the brink, she is not inventing a new morality. She is stepping into an old, well-worn groove in wizarding history. Her reasoning, in this fractured timeline, is almost unbearably rational. Harry is volatile, targeted, bound to a Dark Lord by magic no one fully understands. If he dies at the right moment, perhaps the Horcruxes fall. If he is contained, perhaps the casualties lessen. If he is deceived, perhaps he walks willingly toward the grave at precisely the hour the world most needs him to. Not Dumbledore, who had once sketched similar equations in letters to a boy with blazing eyes. Not Grindelwald, who had carved for the greater good over a prison. Hermione arrives at the same cold arithmetic by a different road. Does she become Dumbledore then? A strategist who compromises, then spends the rest of her life trying to narrow the blast radius of her own decisions, haunted by names on a memorial wall? Or does she become Grindelwald, convinced that history will thank her, that Harry's suffering, Harry's betrayal, is a necessary line item in a ledger that balances out to peace? Which version of Hermione stands at the end of the war and says, quietly, I was right? The wizarding world keeps producing minds who believe danger can be tamed by concentrating power and information in a very small circle. Dumbledore with his secrets, Voldemort with his Horcruxes, Barty Crouch with his prison house son. Lily was a charms prodigy, but even she built protections that depended on a hidden plan and a single child bearing their weight. Again and again, the pattern repeats. A few decide, the many endure. This is important because Hermione's betrayal is not an anomaly. It is continuity. It is what happens when brilliance turns away from trust and toward containment. When the smartest witch of her age decides that the safest future is the one she alone can engineer. The grave of the Golden Trio is dug long before anyone dies. But who, in the moment that matters, does she choose to bury in it? The answer to that will decide whether she ever steps back from the edge or whether someone else must stop her. So we arrive at the place stories usually avert their eyes from, not the betrayal itself, but the last page of the betrayer's life. The grave of the Golden Trio may have been dug long before anyone died, yet someone still has to lie down in it. In one future, Hermione chooses to fall first. The Battle of Hogwarts is burning itself out into ruin when she sees the last, fatal consequence of her plan. A curse she designed, a tactic she recommended, turns on a group of first years sheltering near the shattered entrance hall. This is important. She steps between them and the emerald light she once helped to aim, unspooling a countercharm that tears through her own protections. The stone floor bites cold through her robes. Her last sight is Harry, bloody, stunned, realizing too late what she has done. The grave was empty for her in life. No one ever truly knew the whole truth. Afterward, the story is simple. Hermione Granger, war heroine, died saving children. Not Dumbledore, who had trained her, not Hagrid, who had brought her to Hogwarts, not Sirius, who had distrusted her sharp edges. Only a very few keep the darker ledger of her choices, and they keep it like another Horcrux, hidden, heavy, unspoken. In another ending, she lives, and that is its own sentence. The war closes with an uneasy, fractured peace. Her intelligence is too valuable to discard, her guilt too great to ignore. She walks out of the ministry under a weak grey dawn, carrying a single trunk and a passport charmed into legitimacy. At the harbour, wand tucked out of sight, she boards a muggle ship bound for a country where her name is just ink on a page. The air smells of salt and rust. Gulls circle like pale, indifferent dementors. She becomes a wandering scholar, cataloguing magical fault lines in forgotten communities, tracing how children are pulled into other people's wars. Every new village is a replica of the one she failed to save. Every lecture, every quiet intervention is an attempt to preempt another Harry, another Hogwarts. She is alive, but nowhere feels like home. There is no trial, no cell, no formal grave, only motion. Only exile that never quite admits its own name. And in the darkest path, the law does what Harry cannot bring himself to do. She is tried as a collaborator, her brilliance recast as premeditation. Azkaban has changed, but not enough. Her cell is smaller than the Hogwarts broom cupboard she once feared. Its walls sweat with old magic and older despair. Hermione sits at a narrow desk, hair already streaked with premature grey, writing by wandlight that flickers like a failing star. She drafts treatises on magical ethics, on child soldiers in school colours, on the seduction of plans that treat people as variables. Lily was a charms prodigy, and Hermione passes the legacy of such prodigies the way good intentions become architecture for future atrocities. Her pages escape through lawyers and professors. Decades later, students quote the imprisoned witch who mapped how a world like theirs breaks. Her body is confined, but her ideas walk free, haunting classrooms that still bear the scars of her era. Which of these feels most honest to the Hermione you have followed into this darker timeline? The martyr redeemer, the exiled architect, or the imprisoned reformer? And what does that choice reveal about what you believe justice and mercy should look like when the smartest witch of her age steps over the line and then tries, in the only ways left to her, to step back? To understand why this hurts, you have to begin with who Hermione is allowed to be in the original story. She is the quiet promise that if you are clever enough, diligent enough, stubborn enough about what is right, you will not only survive the grave machinery of the wizarding world, you will matter within it. For countless readers, she is the self-portrait they wished they could step into. The bookish outsider whose mind is her magic. This is important. When that figure turns, when that mind becomes the instrument of Harry's undoing rather than his salvation, it feels like more than a plot twist. It feels like a private betrayal. The fantasy of goodness through intelligence, of safety through preparation, is exposed as a fragile charm, a replica shield that can crack from the inside. If Hermione can convince herself that harming Harry is the rational path to saving the many, then what does that say about our own faith in our judgment, our ethics, our carefully constructed plans? Canon offers the Golden Trio as something almost liturgical in its reliability. Harry, Ron, Hermione, a rhythm, a spell, a steadying cadence across 7 books. They quarrel. They fracture, but the fracture never lasts. Not Dumbledore, who had orchestrated entire wars, not Hagrid, who had carried Harry from the ruins, not Sirius, who had lost everything, ever truly threatened that pattern. The trio endures. The trio is alive. Imagining that unit broken, not by death, but by choice, forces the audience to confront a quieter terror, that even our most cherished fictional friendships are not guaranteed, that loyalty is not a law of nature, but a decision renewed or revoked. Beneath this premise lies a more intimate fear. We like to believe that being smart and well-intentioned is a kind of moral armor. Yet Hermione in this darker timeline embodies the possibility that intellect sharpens the knife instead of blunting it. The same girl who brewed Polyjuice at 12, who would one day alter her parents' memories in the name of protection, now studies law, prophecy and strategy until she can argue herself into catastrophe. She does not wake up evil, she wakes up convinced. The grave was empty, not because Hermione never cared, but because care alone does not anchor a soul. The horror of watching her walk this path comes not from alienation, but from recognition. Step by step, her reasoning is legible. Step by step, her compromises feel like ones a frightened, overburdened, desperately responsible person might make. Have you never overestimated your own capacity to decide what is best for everyone else? and so the pain of this universe becomes its strange, terrible gift. It asks the audience to love Hermione not as an untouchable icon of correct choices, but as a person whose brilliance does not exempt her from darkness, whose story is no longer a neat proof that the clever girl will always be right. It prepares us for what comes next, not whether she falls, but what, if anything, can be salvaged from the ruins of being loved by someone she has chosen to destroy. From here, the thought experiment wants to become a story. It needs a grave, a date, a single moment where the line of canon quietly snaps and the new timeline begins to coil in its place. Choose that moment with care. This is important. Perhaps it is the first task of the Triwizard Tournament when Hermione's suspicion that Harry entered himself hardens into certainty, and every glance she gives him is catalogued as evidence rather than concern. Perhaps it is the Department of Mysteries when she watches him walk into a trap and concludes that Dumbledore's plan is not a plan at all, but negligence dressed as wisdom. Or perhaps it is the camping months of Deathly Hallows, when hunger, Horcrux, and hopelessness convince her that collaboration with the enemy is the only rational path to minimize the dead. Fix your divergence, and then trace every ripple without mercy. Begin inside her skull. The grave was empty in this version, not because bodies were faked, but because certainty itself has died. Deep point of view turns Hermione from an abstract betrayer into a mind we cannot look away from. Let the reader feel the way her logic tightens around fear, how each new compromise arrives dressed as duty. Show the memory of memory charming her parents not as a horror she regrets, but as proof that she can do what others cannot. If she once rewrote her parents' lives for their safety, what, she asks herself, is one boy's destiny against a world's survival? Intercut her path with Harry's. Short, sharp, relentless, a scene of Hermione in a quiet office with ministry files and precise clinical magic. Then Harry in a forest, wand hand shaking, still trusting a girl who is already reporting his movements. Let the timelines brush against each other like ghosts, a corridor she has just left, a map he almost reads correctly, an owl that turns back at the last second because a new charm redirects it. Not Dumbledore, who had always believed in the power of love, nor Voldemort, who believed only in power, will see the whole design. Only the audience will. Keep your tone measured and grave. Resist the temptation to throw knives of surprise for their own sake. The most chilling turns will be the ones that feel inevitable. The meeting she attends because she is tired. The document she signs because it is already on her desk. The replica of her own signature authorizing something she has not quite read. Lily was a charms prodigy, but Hermione is a systems prodigy. Her dissent should feel like a policy paper, not a duel. And then, endings do not grant yourself only one. Write the version where she turns back at the last possible moment, the version where she does not, and the version where the truth is never fully known. Where Harry dies believing she was still on his side and the world erects a statue to a heroine who was never entirely alive to herself. Which of these feels honest? Which feels like a lie she would tell about herself? Hold that question. Because the next step is deciding who, if anyone, will ever learn what she really did. Because the next step is not only who learns the truth, but what that truth reveals about the version of Hermione who never broke. The grave was empty in this AU, in a different sense. The grave where her loyalty should have been. the grave where the Golden Trio once stood as a single shining replica of unity. From the first hairline fractures in first and second year, when she policed rule-breaking with almost religious fervor, through the ideological schisms of fifth and sixth, to the deliberate, calculated betrayal in the forest and tents of Deathly Hallows. Every step was grown from soil canon already gives us. The girl who would imprison Rita Skeeter in a jar. The witch who would wipe her parents' memories for their own good. The strategist who would rather design the plan than trust the chaos. This is important, because none of that is foreign to the original story. It is simply turned, half a degree at a time, until the same precision that saved Harry's life becomes the blade that cuts him open. Yet Canon Hermione does not fall. She stands in the graveyard after Voldemort's return and believes Harry without proof. She walks into the Department of Mysteries on a whisper and a vision, choosing his instinct over the Ministry's decrees. She steps into the Horcrux hunt with no contract, no guarantee, only the knowledge that the magic they are facing might destroy them all. Seen beside her treacherous double, those choices look different now, less inevitable, less tidy. They are not the actions of a girl who had no other path, but of someone who could have broken in half a dozen plausible ways and each time did not. Not Dumbledore, who had centuries of perspective. Not Hagrid, who had simple, stubborn faith. Hermione's heroism is not that kind of uncomplicated light. It is angular, contested, fought for in the private courtroom of her own mind. Pattern interrupt, imagine the same scenes with one altered verdict. Fourth year, she decides the Triwizard Chaos proves Harry is reckless and dangerous. Fifth year, she concludes Dumbledore is a manipulator and Harry his weapon. Seventh year, she looks at the locket, at Ron's hollowed face, and decides the rational plan is to walk away. Every time we watched her hesitate in canon, this AU shows us the other ruling she might have handed down. So seeing her as someone who could have betrayed Harry does not diminish her. It makes her loyalty heavier, more costly, edged with the same steel we have seen turned to darker purposes here. She is not good because the story ordained it. She is good because, standing at her own internal grave, she chose which part of herself to bury. Where, then, is her real breaking point? When you return to the books, when you watch her argue, scheme, control, and still reach for Harry's hand, what do you believe is the moment that shifted a fraction, would have sent her down the path we have just walked? Hold that in your mind, because the next movement of this tale will test that answer. So now the question turns, quietly and inexorably, toward you. You have walked beside this darker Hermione, watched her hesitate on the edge of the grave she is digging for Harry's trust. This is important. If she were to fall, where, exactly, would you place the moment of impact? Return to the canon story in your mind and choose a page, a corridor, a single line of dialogue. Is it the firebolt confiscation in Prisoner of Azkaban when she chooses rules over friendship and the air between them goes thin and cold? Is it the Goblet of Fire selection when she stares at Harry and, for a heartbeat, does not know whether to believe him? Perhaps Umbridge's reign, when the Ministry's pink horror makes law itself feel corrupt. Or the Astronomy Tower, with Dumbledore's body falling and every protection she trusted dying with him. Name the book. Name the chapter. Explain why, in that precise fragment of time, her loyalty might fracture into something more lethal. When you speak of her, do not be content with a single word. Villain, hero, traitor, protector, these are replicas of understanding, tidy labels laid over a far more dangerous magic. In this alternate plan, is Hermione a deliberate architect of Harry's downfall, or a tragic protector who believes that stopping him is the only way to save the world he keeps risking? Does she turn because she loves him too much to let him walk to his death, or because she cannot bear that his name, not hers, is written into prophecy and carved into the world's expectation? If you feel the pull, let this become more than a comment. Write a short scene in which she sits across from a quiet ministry official and signs her name to a secret contract, accepting a role as their unseen agent inside Hogwarts. Or sketch the outline of Hermione as a double agent with Snape, trading truths and half-truths in a dim classroom, both of them knowing that one lie too many will be fatal. Or imagine her as a dark strategist at Voldemort's side, the brightest witch of her age, diagramming every weakness Harry has ever confessed by a common room fire. The grave was empty. The girl who once filled it with certainty about right and wrong is now alive in your hands. Consider, too, how her story ends. Should she be redeemed, dragged back from the edge by the very boy she tried to stop? Should she be punished, her name spoken with the same chill as Pettigrew's? Or should she remain in moral limbo, wandering a world where everyone has blood on their hands and justice is a question that no longer has a clean answer? Every theory you offer, every scene you write, every quiet plan you sketch in the margins keeps this possibility breathing, that the brightest witch of her age might decide the boy who lived is the boy who must, at any cost, be stopped. In the end, Hermione's betrayal is not a story about darkness breaking in from outside. It is a story about protection curdling into control from within. The brightest witch of her age looks at the boy who lived, looks at the graveyard of children and futures around him, and decides that love, if it is to mean anything, must be willing to stop him. This is important, because that decision does not emerge from hatred. It grows from the same soil as every moment she ever saved his life, the devil's snare in first year, the time-turner calculations in third, the Horcrux research that kept them all alive in the forest. The difference in this AU is not what she sees, but what she believes she is allowed to do with that sight. She stops asking, "How do I help him carry this?" and begins asking, "How do I take it away from him, by force if I must?" Around her, the pattern is already written. Dumbledore edits the truth in the name of the greater good, feeding Harry fragments of prophecy and half-explanations. The Ministry manufactures propaganda, printing replicas of reality in the Daily Prophet until the real thing is almost unrecognizable. Voldemort twists memory and fear, turning information itself into a curse. Hermione steps into that battlefield of words and documents and sealed files, convinced that if she controls the flow of knowledge, she can control the outcome. She withholds, she misdirects, she signs her name to reports that turn Harry from symbol into potential weapon. The tragedy is not that she is wholly wrong. She is right to see the grave cost of tethering a soul to a prophecy, right to fear what repeated exposure to death and power might carve into Harry's magic. She is right to notice how often others decide for him. Not Dumbledore, who had watched a baby become a banner. Not Hagrid, who had carried that baby from a ruined house and placed him on a doorstep. Not Sirius, who had sworn godfather and then vanished into Azkaban. Hermione is the one who refuses to pretend the pattern is harmless. But she makes a different, quieter mistake. She believes she is the only one who truly sees. Once that conviction settles, she stops listening to Ron's clumsy, necessary loyalty to Harry's own stated wishes, even to the uneasy questions in her own mind. Lily was a charms prodigy, and still her most dangerous creation in that other story was not a spell but a plan she trusted to completely. Hermione's equivalent is her certainty. This is where the warning reaches through the page. In any world, brilliant, well-intentioned people can justify grave harm in the name of safety, order, or peace. Laws are tightened, voices are silenced. Lives are arranged for their own good. Stories like this AU matter because they let us feel the weight of those choices in a place where no one is actually hurt, where we can walk away and still remember the ache. So the camera returns to 3 quieter images, almost too gentle for the war that waits beyond them. Hermione in the library, fingers ink-stained, eyes bright, tracing a line of text that will save them all. Harry on a broom, wind in his hair, laughing as if the sky belongs to him and always will. Ron by the fire, crumbs on his jumper, telling a story badly and making them laugh anyway. In this what if, those moments are the fragile things she spends, piece by piece, to keep the world alive. In canon, she does something harder. She stays, she doubts, she argues and forgives and chooses again and again to stand beside the boy who lived rather than over him. She stays in canon. Tonight, she did not. And if you have walked with her this far into the dark, there is one more choice to make. If this slow, deliberate descent into betrayal held you, if watching the brightest witch of her age fracture felt, in some quiet way, inevitable, then let the magic know. A simple like is not a trifle here. It is a signal to the unseen machinery that there is value in stories that take their time, in character studies that do not flinch, in alternate plans that unfold like a long, dangerous charm. This is important. It tells the algorithm that slow burn, character deep dives deserve to be kept alive. For those who want to keep walking these other roads, to keep standing at the edge of the map where canon ends and conjecture begins, there is a further step. Subscribe and turn on notifications, not as a reflex, but as a quiet vow that this will not be the last grave we open and find empty. The grave was empty when James and Lily did not die. It is empty again when Hermione's loyalty is laid to rest and something colder rises in its place. Ahead lie other questions. What if Harry's parents had faked their deaths with a forbidden charm? What if Dumbledore raised Tom Riddle differently? What if Snape never bent the knee to the Dark Lord? Each new what if is another corridor of the same castle. Share this one with those who love her, with the friends who would swear, hand on heart, that Hermione Granger could never, under any strain, betray the boy who lived. Invite them to watch beside you, to pause on the moments we marked as fault lines, to argue over where her breaking point truly lies. Was it the Ministry's lies, the weight of always being the one who knew the plan, the terror of watching Harry walk, again and again, toward another war he might not survive? Then, when the echoes of this story have settled, leave your own in the comments. Not only your versions of Hermione the traitor, but any dark, dramatic twist that forces the familiar into a new, unsettling light. A world where the replica on the battlefield is Harry and not his parents. A timeline where not Dumbledore, who had planned so much, loses control earlier. Not Hagrid, who had carried him from the ruins, but another guardian entirely. Not Sirius, who had offered Godfather's love, but a stranger with a different truth. Offer us your fractures in the canon, your unspoken bargains, your unforgivable plans. Tonight, we asked what might happen if the brightest witch of her age turned against the boy who lived. Next time, we will ask a different question, open a different door, disturb a different grave. But the quiet, dangerous magic of What If will still be here, waiting for you to return.